test. So Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Thursday, September 10th regular meeting of the Planning Commission. This meeting is by teleconference only. I'll start by asking the Commission Secretary to call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Lezak. Commissioner Ward.
Here.
Commissioner Pickett.
Here.
Commissioner Reiser.
Here.
Commissioner Strongman.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson. You're muted. Now you're muted again. I'm not quite sure. We can see you. I see that you're there. Oh, anyway, thank you. Vice Chair Kerselik.
Here.
And Chair Lezak.
Here.
All 7 are present and we may conduct business.
Thank you. So as stated earlier, this meeting is by teleconference only. This meeting will be conducted pursuant to provisions of the Governor's Executive Order, which suspends certain requirements of the Ralph M. Brown Act. Teleconference locations are not open to the public. To provide a live remote public comment, please join the Zoom teleconference meeting. The meeting ID and password are, the meeting ID is 986-7428-3932, and the password 955941. For those of you who wish to make a public comment, when the public comment period is open, please use the raise hand feature. We'll alert staff and the commissioners that you have a public comment that you'd like to provide. Please wait your turn. Once brought into the meeting, please state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to make your remarks. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start the meeting now with the first item on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. We'll ask the Commission Secretary, are there any items on the consent calendar this evening?
There are no items this evening. Thank you.
So seeing none, we'll go ahead and move forward into the public communications portion of the agenda. This portion of the meeting is reserved for comment on items not on the agenda. Under the Brown Act, the Commission cannot act on items raised during public communications, but may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed, request clarifications, or refer items to staff. So at this time, we will ask if there are any members of the public who would wish to make public comment during the public communications section.
I have checked with my colleague here at City Hall. There is no one who has cropped up looking to share at this point.
Okay, thank you. So seeing no public communications, we'll go ahead and move on to the public hearings section of tonight's agenda. The first item on the agenda is the Meadow Bed and Breakfast Inn Airbnb conditional use permit application number Y19-115, the address 1295 Camino Verde. Before we begin with the staff report, we'll ask staff and commissioners if anyone has any ex parte communications that they would like to report at this time. Seeing none, we will go ahead and move into the public hearing and ask staff to begin their staff report.
Okay. Good evening, commissioners. Let me just load the presentation and then we'll begin. Okay, thank you. Again, good evening, commissioners. For the record, my name is Simmer Gill. I'm an assistant planner with the City of Walnut Creek, and we are here tonight to discuss the proposed bed and breakfast inn for the Airbnb that will be located at 1295 Camino Verde. Please note the Planning Commission was supposed to hear this item on August 27th. That was 2 weeks ago, but due to technical issues, we had to cancel the hearing at the time, and there was no decision made on the project. And now we are back with the same project request, and the applicant and owner, Thomas Metal, is here tonight, as am I, to answer any questions that you may have after the presentation. Here is the site overview. The property is located on the north side of Camino Verde, approximately 325 feet from Conejo Way. And the surrounding area consists of fairly large lots. The adjoining properties are separated due to the change in elevation and slope. And the closest neighboring property is located to the east and takes access off of a different street, Bodega Place, and is separated from the subject site by mature trees and fencing that provides screening and privacy. The property is zoned single-family residential, which allows bed and breakfast uses subject to the approval of a conditional use permit. And here is the site layout and some photographs of the home and the Airbnb. The site consists of a 2-story home with a 2-car garage, and there is additional paved parking that is located along the southeast corner of the property, as you can see here. And the proposed 2-bedroom unit is attached to the home and again located along the southeast corner of the home. And there is no internal connection between the primary home and the Airbnb unit. However, from the exterior, it will look and function like a home. The Airbnb consists of 2 floors, and here are some photographs. The lower floor contains a living room and a half bathroom, and the upper floor contains 2 bedrooms and a bath. And the Airbnb does have its own separate entrance that's located along Camino Diablo, as you can see here. And the front entry will have a digital lock setup to monitor all activity on site and also to ensure that entry happens from the front door only. The other door that you see here leads to the primary residence, and which is occupied by the host and property owner. And the home is also set up with a bay alarm system with floodlights and motion detectors to ensure security and safety of the property. And here are additional photographs of the home. And as you can see on these photographs, the site is vegetated with several street trees that help in maintaining privacy from the adjoining properties. The applicant will maintain the home as his primary residence and will monitor the rental unit to ensure that guests follow all of the house rules that are outlined in the business plan. And 2 guest rooms will be rented out to 1 group at a time, and the maximum of 4 guests will be allowed at any one given time. And the maximum allowed stay is 7 days. The check-in time is 3 p.m. and the checkout time is 11 a.m. Additionally, the applicant is not proposing any exterior signage that would indicate operations of an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast at this site. Also, the applicant will prohibit any parties or events which are outlined in the house rules. And I will go over that in the next slide. The house rules specifically state that no parties or special events are allowed. Additionally, staff has included a condition of approval which states that any type of parties or special events will be prohibited on site. Additionally, no unregistered guests, visitors, or smoking is allowed on the property, and no mail deliveries apart from food and meals will be allowed. And the guests will be required to keep noise to a minimum to respect the property and the surrounding residential neighborhood, and as well as they will be required to park in the designated parking spaces, which is the driveway right outside the and if the guest does not abide to the rules outlined in the business plan, they will be evicted immediately. Additionally, due to COVID, the applicant has added additional cleaning protocols and will pay extra attention to disinfecting the entire unit and wipe down all doorknobs and surfaces prior to the arrival of any guest, and will also provide the necessary items for guests to sanitize during their stay to follow all health-related protocols. And so earlier this year, the applicant reached out to approximately 35 neighboring properties, which are highlighted blue on this map, and they are all located within 300 feet of the subject site. The owner shared a letter describing the business operations and the house rules, which you all should have a copy of as attachment 7 of the agenda packet. And the applicant did inform staff that none of these neighbors that received this letter contacted them with any objections or concerns. A public hearing notice notifying the same neighbors of today's public hearing was also sent out to these properties, as they are all located within 300 feet of the subject site. And here are the listed findings that are required to consider a use permit for a bed and breakfast use. The Planning Commission is tasked tonight to assure that the proposed bed and breakfast meets the specific use permit findings that are required for bed and breakfast uses, and in addition to the conditional use permit findings, which are listed here. I will go through findings A through J and indicate how the Airbnb complies to the following. The facility is, as I mentioned earlier, the facility is located within 500 feet of Conejo Way, which is classified as a collector street. There will be no more than 2 guest bedrooms where 5 are allowed per finding B. And the maximum length of stay will not exceed 7 days. And the applicant is not providing any meals for the guests. And additionally, there's no cooking facilities on site apart from a microwave. No business signage is proposed to maintain the residential character of the home. And no bed and breakfast inn is located within 500 feet of the subject site based on city records. And finding G says if on-site parking is not located on the paved driveway, it shall be screened. But the required parking is located on the paved driveway. Therefore, this finding does not apply or it doesn't need to be screened. And the exterior appearance of the Airbnb will remain compatible with the neighborhood, as there is no exterior change or modification or expansion that's proposed due to the operations of this use. So the appearance will remain residential. And then finding I, the Planning Commission may allow special events at the facility. However, the applicant is not requesting nor allowing any parties or events to take place on site. And then finding J basically would, if the applicant would not be able to meet findings A, C, and E listed above, then finding J would apply. However, the applicant is not requesting for any exceptions, and the short-term rental conforms to all of the findings that are listed here. Therefore, the Planning Commission does not need to make any special findings for this project. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use permit to allow the short-term guest accommodations within the 2 bedrooms of the existing home, subject to the conditions of approval. And for the record, I received 2 letters, one in opposition and one in support, and you should have a copy of both of those letters. And I also received 1 phone call in opposition of the project. However, no written correspondence was submitted from that neighbor. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm here for any questions. Thank you.
More questions? Can I ask this question of you now? What the person who called in with the telephone opposition, what was the basis for their opposition to the project?
They questioned that why are we supporting a commercial use?
Okay.
So I did go over the staff report, the findings, and identified that it is a subset of visitor accommodations, and any short-term rental, not just an Airbnb, if it was something else, for example, a hotel or motel, would also require a conditional use permit. So I told them about the requirements, and I shared the staff report as well as the attachments. And I did ask them if they want to put something in writing. I can share it with the Planning Commission. However, I haven't received anything.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other commissioner comments or questions of staff at this time? Commissioner Strongman.
Yes, just a couple quick questions. How many Airbnbs do we have in operation in Walnut Creek at this time?
Operations, I wouldn't be able to say, but 2 approved, yes. We have 2 approved bed and breakfast or Airbnbs in the city.
And question probably for the owner, but will the guests have access to the pool in the back?
No, no, there will be no access to the pool.
And there was security cameras. Will they be available? Will they record so that if there's an issue that they reviewed later by the police?
Correct. So I'll let I'll defer that question to the applicant so he could go in more detail. But yes, there are security cameras on the premises of the property. And I think he mentioned that he could put more cameras specifically around the 2-bedroom unit that will be occupied for the Airbnb.
Yeah, my final question is probably more towards the applicant, is their personal experience with Airbnb. Well, I'll wait on that. Other than that, no more questions for you.
Okay, thank you.
If I could follow up really quickly on Commissioner Strongman's question. I am well aware that there are just 2 that are legal in Walnut Creek, and we all know that there are several Airbnbs that are in Walnut Creek. Are you aware, Simmer, and thank you for the presentation, by the way, it was great. Are you aware of the how many short-term rentals are paying transient occupancy tax today? Because I know that more than just the hotels pay TOT or have a license to operate.
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, it's just the 2 that are approved. I don't have the, again, I don't know if Ethan could speak to this, but yeah, I don't think there is any other Airbnb that's paying the occupancy tax.
To my knowledge, the 2 that are approved are required to pay, and I'm not aware of others that are operating in Walnut Creek that are also contributing TOT. There may be, I'm not aware of them.
Okay. And then follow up to that, how's the city handling new inquiries for short-term rental licenses today? If someone came and if another Airbnb that's operating in the city came today and went to well, they can't go to the desk, but if they approach the city electronically to try to legitimize, if you will, how's the city handling those types of inquiries right now?
There's been coordination between the planning division and the business license office to steer any inquiries relative to business license or short-term rentals to the planning division for review and approval of a use permit.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Simmer. That's it for me for now.
Any other commissioner questions of staff? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and ask the applicant to provide a presentation if they'd like.
All righty.
Yes, hello, good evening, everybody. So first of all, thank you so much, Simmer, for your presentation, and thank you so much for doing this whole process to be so available to us and really work with us to get this application started. So really quick, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a history to the project, what we have going here. So we moved to Walnut Creek a little over 2 years ago now, and we love it here. Our second daughter was born here in Walnut Creek, so we are very, very happy with how our life is going, and maybe I can share the news too, but my wife is pregnant again, so we're expecting our 3rd kid to have here in Walnut Creek. So yeah, so we bought this property because we fell in love with it. It's a beautiful house. It's a beautiful neighborhood. You have access to the open space. We just thought the location was amazing. And what led us to buying the property was also that you had that extra space because we both come from a very what we call it from countries far away. To say my wife's family, a lot of them live still in Nigeria, and we have a lot of extended family on the East Coast. And then as to my family, I'm from Germany, as you might hear from my accent. So yeah, so we have a lot of family come visit us. So we like that the space on that property. Initially, what we had going with the space, what we had over there, we had long-term renters in there, or we tried at least to have long-term renters in there, and we had issues with late payments, people bailing out on us last minute. So it kind of like went back and forth. So with my mom retiring and my wife's parents also being retired, and we having now more grandkids, so to say, they're looking to come and visit. We wanted to have that space, and we explored the option of having a short-term rental versus via Airbnb or VRBO, for example, over there. So that was the whole idea. And then obviously, I mean, life is not cheap in California, as you all know. So we as a young family, we were also trying to make some extra money while the space is unoccupied when our families are not visiting us. So that was the whole motivation behind going to going through this whole motion. And while we were setting everything up for Airbnb, we came across the laws, and we knew we had to pay the taxes to the city, the transit tax, the TOT, what you mentioned earlier. And while I was inquiring that with the city, they actually told me that I had to apply for the conditional use permit, and that's why we are here today, because we wanted to go through the right channels and do everything in the correct way. And I found it quite interesting to see that that there are only 2 other Airbnbs approved, because when you go on a website called AirDNA, what is, so to say, an analysis of all operating Airbnbs within the area. So you go to San Francisco, you see all the Airbnbs. You go to Lafayette, Walnut Creek, you can really see who is operating Airbnbs in the city, where they exactly located. So we were quite, surprised to see that you had almost 150 Airbnbs running here in the city, and pretty much nobody is, I guess, paying those taxes. So we wanted to go about this the right way, and I hope that is appreciated tonight by the Planning Commission and by the City Council, that we're trying to do the right thing here and going this way.
In addition to the community as a whole as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, we have 2 little kids, and we have a 3rd one on the way. Mm-hmm. So safety as a primary concern for us when we are operating these things. And with installing the security cameras, and yes, the police will absolutely have access to review anything if there would ever be an incident like that, but we really try not to have, because we do screen the applicants prior. Nobody can just book it. We would obviously go through an approval process and make sure that they have a good history with Airbnb itself. And I think you can do that through their website. Yeah, I guess if you want to add anything.
So we currently have Nest systems in our house as of right now, and we enjoy that system because it's connected to Wi-Fi. It has 24 access. You can easily see it on any of the devices in your home, including the handheld. I'm a stay-at-home parent, as my husband is working outside of the home, so I'm here all the time, which is leading into the fact that this would be, it would not be a no-host situation. We live directly on property right next door. I mean, honestly, if I wanted to, I can knock on the wall and you could hear. So it would be closely monitored. The Nest system has access. If you do not pay for the program portion that connects to it, you only get about, I think it's 3 days worth of recording. But we've already paid for the program portion so that you will be able to get indefinite amounts of recordings. And that recording is to be saved or transferred in case it needs to be used by authorities in any situation that may be escalated. In addition, I'm not quite sure if maybe you guys may have any specific questions in regarding to how we're hoping to run the Airbnb. But as Simar stated, check-ins would be at 3 p.m. and checkouts would be at 11 a.m. The latest check-ins would be at 10 p.m. And this is to work in conjunction with the city's ordinance, the noise ordinance. So there wouldn't be any check-ins allowed. And because of that type of screening and maintaining the noise level in the area, it also works in conjunction with the screening of the quality of guests that we're looking to have. We've minimized the stay to seven days, and we've minimized the amount of people that can stay on property to 4. So 1 group is only allowed at a time, 4 guests are allowed at a time. Where this screening allows for a specific quality of guests, and that is business travelers who usually are traveling 1 to 2 people together, and small families. So this will help to kind of minimize the impact into our neighborhoods and the cities. We're having a large variety of guests, which I would not appreciate to have. I have small children on site and I live here, and I enjoy the quiet and the peace and serenity of the neighborhood, which is one of the reasons why we moved here in the first place. And we'd like to maintain that, not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors and other members of our community. As of right now, I mean, we've had a few positive responses from the neighbors actually that have gone by. The letter that we sent out actually was a really great way to meet some of the other neighbors that we haven't met before. So it got us a chance to kind of speak on a deeper level with a lot more members of our communities, and even those who are further than just on Camino Verde, our particular street in our block. So we've had a significant amount of positive responses. I think it's maybe about 4 or 5. I've had one discussion of concern with the neighbor, and once we got a chance to chat and we explained what we were looking to do and he had received the letter, it opened up a little bit more doors for understanding on how we were planning to run it, as opposed to what he may have previously thought, and what we were looking to do to run the Airbnb. And actually, we've had a request already come in, and we don't even have our permit, nothing is running. And I actually got an email, a request saying, well, as soon as you guys get the permit, and I really hope you do, they'd like to have their mother and some in-laws stay with us, because it's perfect. They get to be nearby. And that's kind of what we were hoping to do. So it helps in a way actually to serve our communities and serve our neighbors. And I think that's really a great thing, a bonus, and being able to do this and being able to kind of contain how we're going to do it. And as of right now, that's pretty much it. We just are looking to maintain the peace and quiet and security with our neighbors, and kind of maintain our strand within the fabric of our community, as well as maybe taking advantage of a few of the benefits that having a lodging, as we're not particularly a bed and breakfast, we're more of a lodging, a short-term lodging, would provide us for our family.
Well put.
Okay, well, thank you for that very detailed explanation. And we'll go ahead and ask if any of the commissioners have questions of the applicant. Commissioner Strongman?
Yes, since a lot of family is going to be visiting, especially with the new baby coming through, and I assume you'll be utilizing the space for that family, your extended family. What percentage of the year do you expect to be actually offering it as an Airbnb?
No, I'm not quite sure. I think it's something that we would be checking in with our families to see when they would be visiting.
I would say, as a wild guess, you would
Yeah.
say somewhere in the 50% range.
Of what time in the year, then that might work. Yeah.
50% of the year would be Airbnb.
Correct, yes.
Yes, right now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, as of right now, yeah.
And your personal experience with Airbnb, have you ever done this before?
I've used it Airbnb. We both done when we've done traveling. Yeah.
No further questions.
And I can elaborate just one thing. I have studied hotel management, and I've been working in the hospitality industry for the last 22 years. I'm now a director of operations for a large restaurant group. So I've been around the blocks with dealing with guests and guest issues, and handling that quite sophisticatedly.
Okay, any other commissioner questions of the applicant? Commissioner Reiser.
Just a couple. So you haven't hosted before, but you've been an Airbnb guest, so you're familiar with the platform and everything like that. I assume
Yeah.
you're
Correct.
setting everything up, probably already set, ready to kind of push go as soon as you get your permit.
Yes.
Correct, yes.
Can you speak to the enhanced housekeeping protocols that Airbnb's requiring that you talked about? I know that just for the record, I am an Airbnb host, so I'm going to ask some questions that are specific to it. So in terms of the enhanced housekeeping protocols, how do you plan to handle housekeeping? Are you outsourcing it or doing it in-house?
Outsourcing. We currently actually have someone who assists in housekeeping our own home, who has done Airbnbs in the city, San Francisco and Oakland. So she is familiar with it. In addition, we actually used the gentleman that does the oxygen sanitation in our house when everything started, and I was pregnant and I was a little bit crazy. Wanted to make sure everything was okay for the kids, and take your shoes off at the door and sanitize everything. So it was a gentleman's service that's used at the restaurant in sanitizing, and we used it at the home, and I was quite happy with the service that he provided. So
yes, so we have access to this electrostatic gun, so we can really truly sanitize the entire place and within half an hour.
Right. Okay. They're pretty specific on what they want
that's
done.
what it is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Are you from a business perspective? Did you take out an insurance policy that handles just short-term rentals? Do you have a rider on your insurance policy that handles just short-term rentals?
Yes, correct. We have that, and then we put an additional umbrella policy on top of that to be really completely covered.
Okay. And then my last question, I think, is why did you only go for a 7-day stay? There's nothing magic about going. What makes it short-term rental is less than 30 in terms of, and when it gets over 30, you're actually paying transient occupancy tax, etc. But is there a reason you selected just 7 days as a max?
It's part of the screening. It is to really whittle down the quality of guests that we're receiving, and I think for me, comfortability of a little bit more of a shorter stay in the turnover.
Sure.
I think it's much more appropriate for me and my family staying here, for the neighborhood as well. Most business travel trips, I know when my husband has taken them, have been 3 or 4 days, 5 days max. So I just felt that was a little bit more appropriate, and that was going to help to reduce our pool of what we're looking as quality guests for staying with us.
Okay. I guess this question will go back to staff afterward or now, if it's appropriate, in terms of what's the opportunity for them to switch it to switch that 7-day stay requirement that we're going to be putting in the conditions to something more should they decide to make that higher. And the reason I asked that to the applicant is that Airbnb especially is one of the very few, if not the only, it's the very beginning of the recovery of travel and tourism in terms of where people are beginning to book and travel again. And they're seeing different trends in the types of bookings that short-term rentals are getting. It's a shorter booking window, so they're booking closer to the time they need to do it. They're doing it for, they're relatively local in terms of where they're coming from, just because of air travel and things like that. It's a little bit less business and more transient, meaning it's either parents visiting kids or kids visiting parents. And you're getting, in some cases, longer visits. Airbnb is encouraging people to book for longer periods of time. You get like traveling nurses or people that are in town for a couple of weeks to do something. So I kind of just put that out for more, I guess, consideration, if you will. And that's the reason behind my question of just 7 days. But the question back to Simmer about what's the procedure or process by which they'd have to go through to extend just that 7-day?
Yeah, so finding C says the maximum length of stay shall not exceed 1 week. So I think Thomas was just trying to comply to all of the findings.
Okay.
And finding J does allow the Planning Commission to allow an exception to finding C should the applicant request to extend the stay from 7 days to, let's say, 29 days.
And would they have to come back before the Planning Commission to be able to change that?
Yes.
They have to change it? Okay. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the information as well and the clarification.
And any other commissioner questions of the applicant? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and open the public comment to general members of the public. And we will ask our commission secretary, do you have any other, anyone from the public who would like to make comment at this time?
So with my colleague here in the chamber, I don't believe anyone has raised their hand to indicate a live comment, but I did want to, no live comment. I did want
to. You're on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry.
Yep, that was well done. Thank you. I did receive actually, or the commission has received and been in receipt of 2 emails from the same sender. I think perhaps one was sent prematurely, but there is public comment available in written form that we did receive from one neighbor that I could read into the record, given that there are no live comments to relay. And I'd like to proceed now, if that's all right with the chair.
Please do.
This is an email from, and pardon me as I rearrange. Here we go. Okay.
And you have up to 3 minutes.
Correct. And so I'm going to both start the clock and read quickly but efficiently, hopefully that everyone can follow. And here we go. Hello, my name is Tom Coleman, and I own a home in the neighborhood of this proposed B&B. My questions: will there be an addition to the residence to accommodate the business use? How many people will this B&B be limited to host at any given time? Will the owners be required to be at home when guests are in attendance? Will the owners be required to state and enforce noise mitigation requirements for all capitalized visitors' guests? Will there be a limit on the number of days, a week, month, this property can be occupied by visitors and guests? And continuing, the commenter, Tom Coleman is the author, writes, I watched the video and the northwest corner of the building is inside the required setback. How can the city approve a use when the building is in violation? That concludes the receipt of public comments written for this item.
Okay, thank you. So with that being the only public comment, we will go ahead and go back to the applicant and ask the applicant if they would like to respond to any and all of the comments from the general public, with acknowledgement that many of these questions have probably been answered as part of the staff report and presentation so far.
I'm not sure if you would like to leave.
You can go ahead.
Well, as we've stated before, there is a minimum for the length of stay, and that's going to be the 7 days, as we had talked about, or 1 week. There is the minimum on the amount of guests that will be here, and that's 4. The check-in and check-outs and the observation and close, strict enforcement of the noise ordinance for the area is involved. So we make sure that we're keeping noise to a minimum, and there's just no noise allowed at the time of the noise ordinance window, which I believe is from 10 to 7 a.m. And the setback, I'm not quite particularly versed as if we are in violation of a particular setback. My apologies, my daughter is joining the meeting as well. We're not and particularly aware of us being in violation of any sort. We've gone through all the proper channels to see that our house was in proper zoning areas and that we were following along, I guess, all the particulars and the laws and rules of what our house and the property was zoned into. I guess the proper verbiage is escaping me at the moment. And 1, 2, 3. I think there may be a question I may be missing that the gentleman asked, but I do recall, besides that last question of the setback he stated, all of those were covered initially in our explanation and in CMAR's and Ms. Gill's presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that final comments. We'll go ahead. Are there any other commissioner questions of the applicant or staff at this time while we're in the public hearing? If not, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and we'll move into the commission deliberations.
I have a couple of questions of Simmer. Do you want those now or after you close the hearing?
We could take them now. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, just a couple quick ones. Just wanted to confirm that the CUP runs with the land and it is a permanent granting unless there's a violation of the conditions regardless of ownership. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So if this current applicant sells a house, the second owner would have the same rights and under these same conditions, correct?
Correct. And I think we have a condition of approval that speaks to that. That says the property shall remain, the home shall not be offered as a no-host short-term guest accommodations where the owner does not reside on the subject property. That's condition of approval number 6.
Okay, thank you. And the one comment, public comment that came in mentioned a encroachment into the building setback. Are you aware of any encroachment, or did you look at setbacks on this building? And does that have any impact on the application?
I was not aware. I did look. R10 zoning requires a 5-foot minimum side yard setback. I believe that's what they have. Aggregate of 15 feet, 10 and 5 on 10 feet on one side, 5 on the other. Again, apart from that, no change is being proposed to the footprint, so nothing changes. And I think even if the project, if the existing home is non-conforming due to setbacks, that does not really impact this project, as there's no exterior change proposed, there's no expansion to the footprint. Everything is within the existing home.
You've been to the site.
I have been to the site.
Okay, and it does not look like an encroachment
It
within 5
appears
feet.
to be, I mean, I didn't measure it, but it appears to be 5 feet to me.
At least, okay. And okay, so then a short-term rental, when there's a existing non-conforming use, and when the property has a significant change to its use or function, then that usually triggers a requirement to comply with zoning. And wouldn't a short-term rental be a significant use change in the use, which if there was a violation of the encroachment or an encroachment violation, wouldn't that trigger modifications to comply?
So we did discuss this, and I think Ethan, would you like to speak to that?
Where I can give a general overview for non-conforming uses and structures. The code is, and I'm trying to pull it up as we go so they don't misstate. There's nothing about, well, to be clear, the continuation of a non-conforming structure. An existing non-conforming structure may exist as it exists today in the field in the same location, provided it's not a large, extended, reconstructed, remodeled, or structurally altered, as the code reads. Unless both the structure and use thereafter conform to all provisions of this chapter, or unless permitted by a variance or a conditional use permit approved pursuant to that article. I think to Simmer's point, there is no structural alteration proposed for or being made to this structure to accommodate the proposed use. The use does remain subject to a use permit, the 3 standard findings of a use permit, as well as the special conditions and the special findings that highlighted A through J from another section of the ordinance. I don't believe that this would, if there speculatively, if there's a violation of the setback, that it would inherently disrupt the processing of this application or the consideration by the commission this evening.
Okay, so this would not be considered a change in the use?
The use is permitted. The change in use is considered and permitted by the municipal code in the process we're going through this evening, in fact. The issue raised relative to the structure, not the use, but the structure says that there's no, you may not change, alter, structurally alter, modify the structure to something other than, pardon me, you may not modify the structure to, if it's a non-conforming structure, you may not modify it without either a variance or a use permit. What I'm arguing or what I'm offering is that there is no proposed change, alteration, structural or otherwise, to this existing home. And that the use, as noted, is actually subject to a different procedure. And that's the reason for the hearing this evening.
I don't really have a problem with it, and it sounds probably isn't any kind of encroachment on the setback. 5 feet is a pretty small setback, and maybe somebody misinterpreted what the setbacks are required. So I just want a clarification on that. I don't really have a problem with the application or the use. Thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant at this time, Mr. Strong, Commissioner Strongman?
Yes, my questions are actually directed to staff. Do we know for sure if there is a violation of the setback, or is this a guess by some neighbor?
I'll offer, and maybe Simmer can comment if she's heard from other neighbors. This was the first I've heard. Simmer and I have reviewed this and prepared for 3 hearings to bring this application forward. This is news to me that this house, existing home, is in violation of the setbacks.
Second question is, the applicant indicated or suggested there's about 150 Airbnbs in Walnut Creek, and if only 2 are approved, what are we doing to kind of help those others to become approved?
So this was an issue that was raised, has been raised with the commission previously when we have had other applications brought before this body. And I'll relay that we are aware and are studying and are preparing to discuss this issue with the council. That said, we understand that there is a revenue, perhaps a TOT related consideration here for the council, among other considerations. And at present, the council has not yet taken any action or held any deliberations on a Tuesday night relative to changes in our existing Airbnb ordinance or relative to actions to be taken to bring 150 plus. And let me just say that's one platform. There could be others to bring any sort of online Airbnb type uses into compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so unless there's any other questions, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and we'll go ahead and ask if any commissioners want to begin the deliberation or propose some kind of a motion. Commissioner Ward?
I just want to make a couple comments. First of all, I'm sorry that you had to come back 3 times to have this hearing. Hopefully 3rd time's a charm here. And I thank you for both your patience and the great presentation that has been made by both staff and the applicant. Also, I just have to comment that the family is very beautiful. And as a mom of 3 myself, I want to congratulate you on expecting your 3rd and assure you that it's fun and never boring to have 3 little kids running around. So good luck with that. And you know, we always love to see the kids come in on the Zoom calls, so that's great. I have no questions or problems with this. I think we should go ahead and approve it. The only issue would be whether you want to extend the option of having more than 7 days just for flexibility. But since you've asked for 7, I'm open to making a motion to approve the resolution as presented, if this is the time for that.
This would be the time for that, so
Okay.
that's okay if you'd like to do that.
I'd like to do that.
We'll go ahead to Commissioner Reiser because he was raising his hand before we come back to you, Vice Chair.
Just a comment before I,
Go ahead.
sorry, just a comment before I second, and it's more of a soapbox comment. And in terms of the number of Airbnbs, that it was brought up at a prior meeting that I had received data from Airbnb directly that in 2019, last year, there were 260 active listings in Walnut Creek, not 150. Familiar with AirDNA, but 260 active listings. And it really, there's no way we're going to see that many people before this commission. I just think it's onerous to put people through the process, the cost, the expense, the hassle of, it should be something that we expedite. And as Ethan, Commission Secretary Bindernagel had mentioned, that it was brought up by Commissioner Lezak at the time in terms of the process really should be more expedited. In terms of just to get it on the record one more time, in terms of how much revenue was collected in the city of Walnut Creek, there was $2.2 million in host earnings. With over 7,500 inbound guests in 2019, which as Chair Lezak did at the time, a quick math saying that we lost out on about 187,000 in TOT. Not that we're in this for the money per se, but it shouldn't be as onerous as going through a CUP process to be able to do this. And it needs to be expedited, and B, there is an opportunity there in terms of uncollected TOT and people that are operating that really do want to do it right. I'm not suggesting that everybody that are the other 200 and however many are doing it illegally per se, but technically they are, and we really should get them in compliance. So So I know that COVID delayed the process on studying this, and they're moving toward a policy position, but would urge that we kind of nudge them a little bit along to try to expedite that. And with that, I will, unless there's other, I think Brian had some comments to make, but I'll second otherwise.
Okay, we'll go ahead and ask Vice Chair Kraselic if he'd like to add any other comments before we call for a vote.
No additional comment.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We'll ask the Commission Secretary to call for a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Reiser,
Yes.
Commissioner Pickett,
Yes.
Commissioner Strongman,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kraselic,
Yes.
and Chair Lezak.
Yes.
The ayes have it. The motion carries 7-0.
Okay, congratulations with that. We will go ahead and continue our agenda, and by moving forward to the next public hearing item. Second public hearing item on tonight's agenda is the project Mount Diablo mixed use application number 18-063 for the addresses of 1532 and 1556 Mount Diablo Boulevard. And before we have the staff presentation, we will ask if any commissioners would like to report any ex parte communication. Having a hard time seeing you all because when you guys put the presentation up, my screen changes here. Is anybody raising their hand? So I would like to say that while I did not speak directly with the applicant, I spent a lot of time trying to understand and research the project and understand better the changes, and spent quite a bit of time on the phone with staff. So I want to thank staff for their additional time helping me understand the application. And with that, we'll go ahead, with not seeing any comments, we'll go ahead and ask staff to begin their presentation.
Thank you. Let me just share my slides here. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Greg Kapovich, a senior planner with the Planning Division here at City Hall. I'll be presenting to you a mixed-use project, which is at the corner of Mount Diablo and Locust. This was actually before you at a study session in July of this year. The project does require a conditional use permit to allow a residential use in a typically commercial PR zoning district. That CUP also allows the commission to set the residential density and to set the residential parking standards. The project also requires a minor use permit to allow for a valet parking program, a tentative map for airspace condo units, an exception to the setback along Mount Diablo Boulevard, and an addendum to the existing specific plan EIR. So before I get into the proposal, the site is considered a part of the downtown core area and is within the Locust Street Mount Diablo specific plan. It's identified as Opportunity Site 2 in that plan. Together, the two properties were planned for a mixed-use development to contain about 20,000 square feet of commercial space, 36 residential units, and 124 stall underground parking garage. And here is the proposal. It's 3 buildings with the shortest 2-story building fronting the corner of Mount Diablo and Locust before rising to 4 stories as you move north and east, just as envisioned in the specific plan. Building 1, which is also phase 1, is 4 stories, about 10,000 square feet of ground floor retail, 30 residential condo units on floors 2 through 4, and a rooftop open air restaurant and landscape deck area. The second phase, indicated in purple and red, would be 2 separate buildings with a public paseo separating the 2. At the corner is a 2-story, 9,000 square foot building, commercial building, a 4-story building with 7,000 square feet of ground floor retail on the ground floor, 12 condo units above, sits just behind that corner building. No rooftop activation is proposed on either phase 2 building. The applicant actually represents both ownership groups on a phased approach. Phase 1 would be constructed first, followed by phase 2. They would share garage ingress, egress, and the garage ramps on the phase 1 side of the site, and additional underground parking stalls once phase 2 was complete. Other elements of the specific plan would be split. The idea being that once phase 1 development would not prohibit phase 2 from completing the vision of the specific plan. The use permits to allow a residential use and establish appropriate density and parking traverse both phases. Phase 2 would have to return to DRC for final building design considerations and to PC for any future mapping actions. But the use, density, parking requirement, and sidewalk width would be entitled on phase 2 tonight, along with the phase 1 portion. So let's talk density, which is the first item of the CUP that's under consideration tonight. The PR zone, which is strictly a commercial zone, does allow for residential uses if there's a specific plan that allows it. In this case, we do have that, but it does allow the Planning Commission to set that density. The proposed 42 units across the combined site would result in an overall density of 54.75. This is actually in line with the range allowed in the multifamily high, special high general plan designation, which is really only found in the core area and is intended to expand downtown living. Given that the density does fall within the appropriate range, staff does support it. Additionally, a majority of the commissioners expressed support for this density at the last study session. Now the second part of the use permit, which is establishing the residential parking requirement. Given the complexity of the project, I've drafted a revised resolution that tries to simplify as best as possible the parking request. That was distributed to you guys via email later today, this afternoon. It was published online, so it is a part of the backup at this point. It's really just meant to clarify. So at project completion, when phase 2 is done, the underground parking garage can provide 121 parking stalls. Those are physically striped, self-park parking stalls. Across both phases, 65 of those stalls are required for the commercial component of the project, which is the 1 per 300 standard that you find in the PR district, which means 56 stalls would be provided for the residential component of the project. Now, it is up to this commission to determine the residential parking requirement, but what is typically required? Is 56 for residential appropriate? I plan to show you what this project would require in other areas of the city, just to kind of provide you guys with some context. So the project located outside of the downtown area, and that would be your typical M1, M1.5, not necessarily downtown, a little more suburban, less dense, would require 80 parking stalls for the residential component. That's all based on bedroom count. This actually does represent the highest and our most strict and stringent multifamily parking requirement in the city. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we have the north and west downtown specific plans. They were evaluated and approved with a lesser standard. The rationale to do so is that dense areas like the downtown core area have good transit service. The parking requirements in the core area were really developed to avoid oversupply, encourage shared parking between multiple uses with different peak parking demands. You know, the downtown area does promote walking, biking, using public transit, which absolutely aligns with the intent of the PR district, which this site does lie in. So utilizing these other downtown standards, the residential parking requirement is 38 stalls for the 42 units that are proposed tonight. I will add that the environment and the thinking around the topic of parking has changed and continues to change at the state and local levels. In the past 2 years, we've seen the state significantly reduce parking requirements for projects in dense areas and near transit. In fact, you know, mostly market rate projects that do have a small percentage of affordable units were reduced to, parking standards were reduced to 0.5 stalls per bedroom. And in 2020, the parking requirement was completely eliminated for 100% affordable projects. At our own local level, we recently adopted the Rethinking Mobility Plan, which does encourage alternatives to actually constructing parking and does formally recognize that our existing multifamily parking requirements are too high. In fact, the city did just receive a grant to reevaluate those requirements. We're in the process of acting on that grant. And the two specific plans that I've already mentioned reduce the parking stands to align with the state and these local movements. So the specific plans were the most recently adopted by council. They do share similar neighborhood characteristics as the subject site. They reflect both the movement by the state and by our own Rethinking Mobility Plan, and staff does find it to be the most appropriate comparison to assist in making the parking determination tonight, rather than the less dense areas located on the outside the core area, which has already been pegged for reevaluation. And even with these similarities that are shared between this site and the downtown sites, the proposed project threads the needle and actually lands between both standards, landing square in the middle with 56 stalls. So if you want to use another comparison, just as a visual, the residential portion of this project in the north and west downtown specific plans would result in 0.90 stalls per unit. This project is in less dense areas of Walnut Creek. That would be in your typical M1 and M15. That parking would be increased to 1.9 parking stalls per unit. Again, state density bonus laws, you can go as low as 0.5 and to none with 100% affordable. The project proposes 1.33 stalls per unit. Again, just threading that needle between our two high and low benchmarks here. So overall, if you agree that 56 is the appropriate mark, the requirement for parking across both phases would be 121 stalls. Again, these are physically striped and all self-park. However, phase one would be constructed first, and the underground parking garage under phase one can only satisfy parking requirements through the use of a valet system. And that's the minor use permit that's before you tonight. If you allow that valet parking program, you're essentially allowing temporarily the valet to count towards meeting the minimum parking requirement for phase one. It's temporary in nature because once phase two is built, the underground garage can meet parking without the need of the valet parking program. So because it's being built in phases, how do we split the 56 residential stalls between both phases? What's appropriate? Well, the 30 units that make up phase one also represent 71% of the total unit count. If you use proportionally speaking, 71% of the 56 stall that's being considered tonight would equate to 40. So as such, the request is to require 40 residential stalls of phase one, and the remainder, which is 16 for phase two, of which both, when you break it down, are still 1.33 per unit. So together, just during phase one, you can see that phase one would require 67 stalls between commercial and residential uses and can accommodate 70 with the valet. So there would be a temporary surplus of 3 stalls during the valet program usage. A consideration to make whenever you're reviewing a valet parking program is whether or not a program impedes on-site or off-site circulation. The applicant did prepare a trip generation report, which included the phase one ground level retail, the 30 residential units, the rooftop restaurant, all as causes for trips. And again, it was just focused on phase one because the valet parking program will only be required to exist during phase one. Worst case scenario, which was the PM peak hour, 42 inbound vehicles are expected and 28 outbound vehicles are expected. Now it equates to about 1 inbound vehicle every 1.4 minutes and 1 outbound every 2 minutes. So here's the garage ramp with the valet queuing area, just so you can see how this works. The drop-off area is in blue and it's ADA accessible. Once people drop off their car, they can follow the ADA path of travel to either side for access to either an elevator or a stairway. Stairs up at the top would provide access to ground level. The ones down below in the drawing provide access to the plaza area on the ground floor, as well as all the other areas in case you're a resident and you want to access the second, third, fourth floors. The drop-off area can accommodate up to 7 vehicles waiting for the valet service to occur. The 25-foot wide garage ramp does leave 16 feet for vehicles to exit after considering the cars that are stacked there to waiting to be serviced. You can see the pickup area outside the garage ramp entirely in the darker green area. So according to the study, the valet service with 3 employees can service 3 cars every 3 minutes or 60 cars in an hour. Based on that service rate with the queue that can accommodate up to 7 vehicles, the report concludes that the ramp will not exceed the capacity and thus not cause a backup on the commercial lane. Outbound vehicles queue differently so as not to block the garage ramp. And then given the lesser service rate of 28 outbound vehicles and the fact that the parking service does have more control over cars waiting for departure, the study also concludes that the pickup area will not block the garage ramp or any pedestrian access. I will add that the solution to any kind of an overflow problem is actually adding additional valet employees to simply increase the service level. A condition of approval has been added to the resolution requiring increased levels of service should any backup be experienced. But again, the study doesn't foresee any spillage. For all of these reasons, staff does support the program, and at the study session, a majority of the commission did express support. Okay, so we've touched on density, we touched on residential parking and the valet program. Let's move to the setbacks. The applicant took comments from the last study session and made adjustments here. The setbacks in the specific plan were essentially implemented to be measured from the building to the face of curb. And that was done for design flexibility, so you can incorporate landscaping, benches, an unobstructed sidewalk. The project does provide appropriate setbacks with the exception of along Mount Diablo. The applicant provides, move the slide here. The applicant provides an average setback of 12.38 feet. Originally, the setback resulted in a sidewalk width mostly at 9.5 feet, with pinch points that reduced that sidewalk to 7 feet in width. Now, the specific plan does allow this commission to approve a sidewalk that's less than the requirement, and that decision is before you tonight. At the July study session, the commission commented that the sidewalk width should be wider. So in response, the applicant redesigned the project to increase the sidewalk width to 10 feet 8 inches. The pinch points were also expanded from 7 to 8 feet. For context, the project to the east contains a similar setback exception along Mount Diablo, but when that project was approved, they required a sidewalk width of no less than 8 feet. The revised proposal is 2 feet 8 inches wider than the neighboring site, and the pinch points are no less. Also, the downtown area typically requires 10-foot wide sidewalks, and a majority of this project does actually exceed that requirement by 8 inches. The proposed project is designed to extend and widen the existing sidewalk along Mount Diablo down towards Locust Street, while ensuring that there still is a landscape buffer between the sidewalk and the busy traffic circulation along Mount Diablo. So for Opportunity Site 2, the specific plan did envision a mixed-use development like this, but it envisioned about 20,000 square feet of commercial space, 36 multifamily residential units, and this consideration with 26,000 square feet of commercial space and 42 residential units does slightly exceed the scenario that was originally envisioned in the specific plan. As such, staff did prepare an addendum illustrating that the 6 additional units and the 6,000 additional square feet of commercial space does not create any additional significant offense that the specific plan didn't already evaluate. So in summary, the project meets the requirements of the specific plan. It saved the sidewalk width along Mount Diablo and fulfills the vision of the public paseo, the public plaza on site. It improves the dog leg on Commercial Avenue, or Commercial Lane, I should say. Activates the rooftop with a restaurant and garden. Provides for 42 new housing units that increases the housing supply in the downtown area. The proposed density is right in line with the typical projects found within the core area where high density is encouraged. Given the project location within a walkable downtown and a comparison to the neighboring and more recently adopted specific plans, staff does feel parking is sufficient as proposed. Staff recommends the Planning Commission adopt the 3 draft resolutions as recently revised, which includes a conditional use permit to allow residential in a commercial zone, set the residential density at 42 units, set the residential parking requirement at 1.33 per unit, which is 56 stalls overall. Allow for a sidewalk width along Mount Diablo of 10 feet, but no less than 8 at any pinch point, and allow a valet parking program, an addendum to the specific plan EIR. Staff also recommends approval of a tentative map for phase 1 for the 30 residential condo units that are before you and the 10 commercial condo units that associate that request. And that does conclude my presentation. I am standing by for any questions that you may have. The applicant and his team are also here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kapovich. So we'll start by asking if any of the commissioners have questions of staff. Commissioner Strongman?
Yeah, 2 questions. Could you explain what a multi-purpose SAO is and how does it really work?
The Paseo is really meant to incorporate pedestrian activity between the buildings. The specific plan always envisioned multiple buildings on this site, and that's what the applicant's intending to do here. We've got the corner 2-story building, we've got the phase 1 4-story building and the phase 2 4-story building. And the idea being, you know, this is such a large project in scope that we didn't want to funnel pedestrians all the way around the corner along Mount Diablo Locust. There should be some private space in between with a landscape area just to cut through to potentially use as, you know, I don't know what the commercial tenant spaces are going to be, but potentially they can have some outdoor dining out there, things of that nature, maybe some musicians. But yeah.
I got the impression that commercial lane was to be the multi-purpose Paseo as well. Did I read
Well,
that?
we do have we do have, the specific plan does ask that these projects that front commercial lane to investigate and analyze that, and the applicant is doing that. It is going to take multiple ownership groups that front commercial lane, but the idea is that commercial lane primarily is used as a service alley in the early morning hours. We're you know, the applicant's thinking that potentially we could, on a part-time basis, shut down the commercial lane to pedestrians only. You know, it's still getting worked out, but what the applicant's doing now is providing for commercial retail frontage that does front commercial lane that could incorporate, again, some bistro tables, just some more pedestrian activity rather than just the service alley.
Thank you. Second question, what happens if there's a considerable lag between phase 1 and phase 2, say 10 years for some reason? I mean, we're in a pandemic now, potentially recession, there might be a, you know, multi-year lag between the phases. What happens and say if it's delayed 10 years and most of us are not here?
Right. Well, the valet parking program would have to remain intact to accommodate the phase 1 parking. I would say that the phase 2 portion would be still entitled to the density, to the parking requirement, to the sidewalk width. It would just be a matter of when that ownership group decided to go to the DRC and submit plans for what those buildings might finally look like in a final stage. But the entitlements would be locked in. So any changes to the density or the commercial square footage would have to return to this commission or subsequent, you know, commissions in the makeup of the commissioners to modify the use permit.
Okay. And thank you for the red line clarifications in the proposal. And I have no further questions.
Absolutely.
Other commissioner questions of staff? Commissioner Pickett.
Me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so you mentioned something that if there was a backup on the queue for the valet parking, that the solution was to add more valets. Is that correct?
The solution would be to add more valet attendees to,
Yeah, attendants.
to speed up.
Attendants. So
Right,
if
right.
the parking lot is full, how does adding an attendant reduce the queue? There's no place to park the car, whether there's 10 guys or one guy. How does adding an attendant solve the capacity problem?
Well, if it's full, it's full. I mean, the parking garage would essentially be closed to new cars. But if there was capacity and a bunch of cars showed up all at once, and that was the reason for the backup, then the solution would be to add employees to speed up the process.
Okay, and how would they get somebody there on a moment's notice to deal with that circumstance?
Well, I think we would look at complaints. We would, code enforcement would essentially, and traffic for that matter, if code enforcement was being notified that there was an issue or noticed that there was an issue, we'd require the applicant to come back and work with our traffic engineers and figure out if that is the scenario that needs to happen. And the condition of approval would give the city staff the ability to require that.
So there's no instantaneous solution to the the recurring problem. If it happens once a week on Friday nights or whatever, there's no instantaneous solution to it, correct?
Correct. We would have to notice that there was an issue before we could act.
Okay, now my experience on that, I think it's the South Locust Street garage, is particularly Friday and Saturday nights. There's a queue just pulling into that driveway, and that garage is typically full, which would flow over to this garage by virtue of default. So it would seem logical that the overflow from the parking outside the site would gravitate towards this. So how is that going to be solved or guaranteed against?
Well, I mean, I'm in looking at the study, it's saying that during the PM peak hours that's not going to happen. So that's what we're basing our staff recommendation on.
Okay, I have to base my opinion on personal experience, which they didn't ask me what my experience was, and that does happen over there. Okay, so now something you didn't address that was asked at the last meeting. Maybe the applicant could go further into this, but as the planning staff and as the drafter of the resolution, you guys need to be critical in this. On a rooftop area, I asked the question because one of the draws of that rooftop area was that it would be a benefit to the public. And the question was asked, is the general public allowed to go up there without patronizing the restaurant? The answer was by the applicant was yes, they are allowed to do that. So what provisions in our resolutions, I may have missed it, but what provision in the resolution is there to require that condition be applied to?
There isn't one currently in the draft resolution. We could certainly entertain such a condition if the rest of the commissioners agreed with the sentiment. As far as I know, the full intent is to open that up for the public to use. So yeah, I don't think the applicant would have an issue.
So just to point, if I were a restaurateur up there and I saw 10 tables that were open to the public and I could maybe make money by serving people, I wouldn't want those people up there. So I think that would be something we certainly need to include. Now, commercial lane, you didn't spend a lot of time on that, and you'll recall from the last meeting that I have a real problem with that. The fact that there is no safety measure along commercial lane for pedestrian access. The pedestrian access that is provided is negligible. It necks down to about 4 feet in a couple of places due to columns. It's not a pedestrian-friendly pedestrian access, what's being provided, and it only fronts a portion of the building along commercial lane, leaving a danger zone between the end of that walkway and getting to the public garage or anywhere else on commercial lane. The other thing that I didn't think of at the last meeting, but as I was driving down Ignacio Valley Road the other day following a delivery van, box truck, so to speak, there's a crown in the road and the box trucks tilt. As they're driving down the street, they lean to the outside of the street. And I imagine commercial lane has a cross slope in it also. if you provide absolutely no setback from the travel lane to the face of the building, a truck could very easily be a foot off the curb or off the building, and the top of the truck could scrape the building. So I'm going to say that I think that it's a big mistake. I can't support a project that doesn't deal with that. And I also would like to ask if there's any other project in Walnut Creek that anybody can name that was built in the last 30 or 40 years that has no setback from the building structure to a travel lane.
I think the only question was at the end, so I'll tackle that one, and that is the building on the corner of North Main and Mount Diablo. I'm not sure how long ago. I think that was about maybe 5 years ago. That is essentially right on top of Commercial Lane.
Okay. Then we have nowhere to go but to take it out of this building because it's an unsafe condition. I think the intent of the SAO, or whatever you want to call it, commercial activation on Commercial Lane, needs to have more accommodation by this project to widen the usability of Commercial Lane to pedestrians. So now you said let's see, I think in your staff report, you said a sidewalk on Commercial Lane is not required because what you said was that the specific plan didn't mention it. However, I believe we have ordinances that deal with sidewalk requirements, safety requirements, public health and safety throughout the city that apply to any application, regardless of its zoning district or anything else. And have those things been considered in this project as a requirement? Public health and safety.
Yes, we essentially the plans are routed to our traffic engineering and our public works division. They do treat Commercial Lane a little bit differently, and they don't necessarily require a sidewalk along Commercial Lane. Where the building does have some activation that does front Commercial Lane, they have provided a recessed entryway, if you will, that on the first floor where the second story does hang over. It's essentially a pedestrian path that runs along the facade there, and that does range in width from 4 to 6.5 feet. That's ADA compliant, and that gets people down Commercial Lane out of the actual right-of-way.
Okay, two examples. On the access to the Locust Street garage, when development was done there, a sidewalk was required, a pedestrian way for safety. That's coming off of Locust on the south side of that access into the Locust Street garage. The sidewalk was required there. The sidewalk was also required on the building at the corner of Civic Drive and Commercial Lane on the east side, where there's a backside is a parking garage. That's the access to the parking garage, and a sidewalk was required there. So we have two examples of where sidewalks were required, which all made sense. Why, again, do you think it doesn't make sense here for safety for a pedestrian walking on Commercial Lane? They have nowhere to go if the building is right up to the setback.
Because they are providing a pathway on private property to get the pedestrians out of the right-of-way.
Okay, normally we would require a dedication of property, quite frankly. You're missing that whole thing. Normally, a development that causes a pinch down like that would be required to dedicate property to widen the sidewalk to create a publicly safe area. So I'm sorry, I'm getting into comments, not questions. Now, and maybe I missed this on your conditions. We talked about this last time, that there needed to be some provision that guaranteed that the property to the west had access through and the ability to modify the structure on this phase 1 of the project and have access through the structure for the parking on there. How's that being dealt with?
Well, we're treating this like one project.
Okay, so but there are two owners. Okay, let me just interrupt you here for a minute. There are two owners. I'll set the table for you. There's two owners. The second owner, the first owner is a condominium, so it's a homeowners association and a merchants association. So there's 30, 40, 32, 35 owners of the phase one project. And the next guy comes along, he has no relationship, and he says, hey, I'm going to poke a hole in your wall, in your foundation, and I'm going to drive my cars through your property. How is that being dealt with?
Well, we can certainly, add a condition of approval that requires future access to phase two. I don't see a problem with that at all.
Okay, I asked that last time and it's not included this time. Why not?
Open to adding.
Okay, so we would have to have something drafted and have it come back and take a look at it. Let's see, so missing elements are the issue of the rooftop access to the public, access to the adjoining property through this property, and I think it's whether it's, I guess the other commissioners will weigh in on commercial and whether they feel that's a safe condition or not. So those are my questions for you, Greg. Thank you.
Okay, other commissioner questions of staff, and that's just for now because we can always come back. So, commissioners, Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. It's large projects like this often have phased arrangement, and it's often a good thing. It's also helpful to have the phases coordinated, as is proposed here, the parking. But here we've got, as Commissioner Pickett pointed out, two separate ownerships. What is to keep the owners of parcel 2 from deciding 3 years from now that they're going to go in a different direction, different configuration, different arrangement, in which the parking is not coordinated? First of all, is there any reason that the second owners could not do that? Propose a different project?
Yeah, correct. I mean, there's no, crystal ball and no guarantee that the phase 2 owner would come in. I mean, that's their intent. They did sign off on this project. They know that their parcel is being entitled with a density of 12 additional units on their site with a 16,000 square feet of commercial space and 82 parking stalls underneath that particular phase 2 site. If they chose to go a different direction, they would absolutely have to amend the existing entitlements and come back to this commission.
What I'm concerned with is if they did decide that was worth it, would we then be in a situation where phase 1 might be stuck with a parking situation, using valets to top up their parking that's going to go on indefinitely?
That is a plausible, that is a scenario that you should consider.
Thank you.
Okay, other commissioner questions of staff. Who's next? Commissioner Ward.
Can you pull up the picture in the recommendations, the drawing that showed where the building, and it showed a parking lot next to it, and I assume that that's just showing where the phase 1 building is constructed and then how it would look when that's done, but before phase 2 is complete. Is that correct? I want to make sure I'm looking from the right angle and like I'm understanding what's going on there. Yeah, that picture.
This one? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's from the Z Gallery site, from the corner of Locust and Mount Diablo looking east. The rooftop building at the corner of Main and Mount Diablo would be further onward in this picture.
So, I mean, the frustration is, and I guess I don't want this to be a comment, but, this piecemeal development is a real problem. I mean, this looks great. We could even make a plaza there and that'd be fabulous, right? That's where building 3 is going to go eventually, ideally, according to this plan. Is that correct? Where the
there would be a building that would more shift towards the corner of Locust and Mount Diablo, and there would be the finishing of a paseo at this that's half the paseo that would traverse the campus, if you will.
But there wouldn't be a sight line from the sidewalk that looked onto that at all, because there would be a building there, correct?
Correct.
All
It would
right,
be set back a bit. There'd be about 10 feet. I guess you could look, if you look at the planters and then there's that darker gray color, that's the parcel, that's the second parcel of it. You could measure 10 feet towards us in this picture, and that would be a portion of the paseo, and then the building would start.
but that's just completely theoretical. There's no plans at all for that building other than the footprint or the setback
No,
that are given. I mean,
the
there's,
setbacks, the density, the building footprint, the square footage of the commercial are all under purview tonight. It's just the design of that building footprint that would have to go back to DRC in the future.
so even though the two owners aren't working together on, well, they're sort of working together, but not really, even though, so the parcel that's not part of this, those building footprints are also part of this application?
Yes. The density, the parking requirement, to establish the parking requirement on phase 2, we have to know the exact square footage of the commercial space and the number of units that they want to build. So it has to be a part of this.
Okay, but because the owners aren't cooperating in terms of doing this as one project, we can't like shove the whole building over to fix the problems on commercial or do anything like that, because the property line goes through the middle, and that's going to be rectified later after we build these buildings. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And I would add that, you know, the DRC is a part of this project, a part of the whole project. They'll be viewing the phase 1 portion first. When phase 2 does come in, they'll also have a purview over that to make sure we get a consistent look and a consistent paseo.
But as far as the width of the streets and the paseos, we're being restricted by an arbitrary property ownership line on this parcel because we have owners that want us to approve these buildings but don't want to cooperate to come together to bring it to us as one project. Am I correct in that?
No, it is coming in as one project, and the Exhibit A does show a 20-foot wide public paseo here. It's just a phase, you're only seeing in this sketch 10 feet of that, half of that, because this specific property owner is responsible for his half.
So theoretically,
Exhibit A,
is there a possibility that the entire building could be moved over so that the commercial lane could be made bigger at that point? My understanding was that it stops at the property line, but potentially it could be moved over entirely so that there would be less of a pinch point and more of a safety prospect.
If we did that, we would not be reaching the vision of the specific plan that wanted a 20-foot wide paseo traversing the two sites.
Okay, I don't see why not, but I mean, the paseo doesn't have to be in the exact location it's in. It just needs to be there to break up the buildings. You're saying that the property line dividing the two parcels in this big parcel, it's not what's making that be the outline of the building that's proposed here right now?
No, it's the idea that both ownerships share the public amenity that is the 20-foot wide paseo. So it was designed so that they did half, and then the future development on phase 2 did half. I mean, I guess theoretically you could push the building over and eliminate the 10 feet that are on the phase 1 site, but then that would put the onus all on phase 2 to place the entire paseo on his site and lose building square footage on his site. Pros and cons.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, who's next? I don't see if Brian is ready to have questions. I'm going to step in and ask a quick one. You know, from my conversation with staff the other day, I understood that the project had been amended since we saw it as a study session to include sort of both properties, and that it really was intended to be a larger project, at least from the entitlement perspective. and I probably have some operational questions that are more ideal for the applicant. But one question I did have, since I continue to review this after I talked to staff, had to do with the actual what entitlements are being granted. And specifically, I'm asking the question about the tentative map. So I look in the package of information the staff has provided. There's a one-sheet tentative map, and it's specifically for the one parcel. It does not represent two parcels. It does not represent the larger project. I think to try to address Commissioner Pickett's question, there is a note on that tentative map that references that there could be a connection for the garage. So at least, even though that's not drawn and shown as an easement to be dedicated, it at least, you know, creates the concept. My biggest concern is that I've heard staff say in multiple occasions that after this approval that the second parcel would have its entitlements and would be able to go to DRC. But as I look at this, the second parcel does not have a tentative map. It would have to come forward to a planning commission or other body for a tentative map because it's got multiple buildings on it. It can't just condo map one building. It's going to need a tentative map. So if it was really one project and this wasn't just a continuation of a story, why didn't staff ask for a tentative map that represented both parcels? And why wouldn't we have had, rather than a note, why wouldn't we have asked for an easement to be granted now on a tentative map and to be performed on a final map that would provide for these things that Commissioner Pickett accurately brought up? It seems to me that this application, or the entitlement, if you were, is deficient if what has been described by staff truly is the application, that maybe we should just defer this hearing and come back at a future date with the rest of the tentative map. Greg, could you address the missing piece of the tentative map answer for me, please?
Yes, absolutely. To be honest with you, the intent was always, and you're right, I didn't mean to hide the ball there. I did say that they would have to return to DRC for the building design. They would also, phase 2, would have to return to the Planning Commission for their own tentative map. To be honest with you, we don't know we know that there's 12 residential units. We don't know the commercial makeup of how they're going to divvy up their commercial square footage into tenant spaces, into condo unit spaces. So, you know, essentially having a note on the map that says that future access has to be provided, and the knowledge that, you know, they would have to come back for a tentative map anyway. It was just thought we could do it at a later date. That's essentially the answer.
Okay, so with that, we'll see if any other commissioners have questions of staff right now, because I'd like to keep this moving along. Anyone else for now? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and turn this over to the applicant and ask the applicant if he would like to make a presentation, and you'd have up to 15 minutes.
Yes, we will. Waiting for the screen share.
David, if you could clarify, are you going to be sharing the screen, or is your architect or another member of your team?
I am.
Thank you.
There we go. Can someone confirm that they can see our slide now? Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'll get started. So my name is Dave Balducci. I'm the project applicant here A little background on myself for those of you that have not met me. I'm a principal of Aligned Real Estate. I'm a native of Walnut Creek. I grew up there, preschool through high school, came back to the area. I've watched the downtown develop over the past 35 years. We're very active in Walnut Creek, my partners and I, and we're proud to be doing business there and in developing buildings downtown. We are primarily urban infill developers. We build projects on parking lots and gas stations and former fast food restaurants. We routinely deal with the cleanup of contaminated soil. We are actively building the project at 1380 North California, which is also in this specific plan. You may have seen a tower crane go up there in recent weeks. We're also decontaminating a significant spill that happened in the 90s as part of that project. So when this opportunity came up, this was something we were very much interested in. One of the last remaining sort of underdeveloped parking lots in downtown Walnut Creek. We thought it was a great fit with our expertise and our desire to continue to do business downtown. So we approached this project with several goals. The first was to, deliver an international caliber project that the city could be proud of, and that the public would get significant enjoyment of, and something that was specific, that worked with the Locust Street Mount Diablo specific plan. And we designed it as a standalone project. Going to some of the commissioners' earlier questions, this project could operate as proposed indefinitely, and that was initially our intent. But we specifically didn't want to foreclose the development of the other site, which is why this project is designed the way it is designed. So we've been working on this project now with the city for, I think, about 3.5 years. We initially submitted our application, went through many revisions. We were scheduled to come to this commission in April, I believe, of last year. And that was basically the same week that Z Gallery declared bankruptcy. The city asked us to go back and see, because the specific plan did want to see the site assembled. The city asked us to go back and see if we could work more with the neighbor. So we did end up getting the permission to propose this as these 2 phases out of that. And then we came back. We were scheduled for this commission in March, and that was the very first canceled commission of the pandemic. So we then came back in July for a study session via Zoom. We got your comments, and we're back here now with adjustments. So I won't revisit all the slides we presented last time. First, I'll address the comments we've heard, maybe some of the comments I just heard from commissioners, and then a quick refresh on the basics of the project. So one comment was sidewalk width in the front. As Greg noted, we've increased the minimum width, and the sidewalk is a 10'8" sidewalk now, very consistent with 1500 Mount Diablo next door, and I think a very good design that provides separation from the cars on Mount Diablo and a very good pedestrian experience as you walk down the street there. We had heard concerns about the valet parking program and the idea that the HOA would somehow disband the valet operations. Although this would be illegal and impossible for them to do, we have worked, Alan Moore, our attorney, has worked with the city attorney and drafted a condition that is part of this approval that ensures that that can happen, and ensures if the service levels decrease such that the queue wasn't long enough, that we would add staff. Now, to Commissioner Pickett's question about instantaneous resolution of that problem, we typically have other property staff that are available, such that should the queue overflow and the garage wasn't closed, because once it's closed, it's full. But should the queue overflow and we just needed to move those cars, we could bring the front desk person over to assist on an instantaneous basis. And if it were a routine problem, we could add staff during those peak hours. So I would just note that valet parking here is not a novel idea for this project alone. It's contemplated in downtown Walnut Creek. It's contemplated in the other core areas. My partners and I have built a half dozen projects that include valet, many of them operating, for near a decade. I park in one every day. It's not been an issue. We've never seen one try to stop that service, nor are we aware of a project anywhere that has been designed as a valet project that later stopped that service. So we believe the valet parking program will not only be successful, it'll be a benefit to our residents. We have an app where you can dial your car up. It tells you when it's there, you go down and get it. It's very convenient, and a lot of people actually consider valet parking an amenity. There was a lot of discussions on the commercial lane sidewalk. We do not have enough room in the back to physically fit the sidewalk. I would note that this project, and as a requirement of the specific plan, has widened and donated area to address the turning radius of a WB40 truck. So this has been studied. The project accommodates it. A truck can safely make that turn without hitting the building or any other buildings. The issue is our site very much pinches back there, and we've got the ramp, which we need to have where it is, and the PG&E vault needs to be there. And so we can't continue the sidewalk that we do carry back about 2/3 of the way, all the way down commercial lane. I would note that if there was to be a sidewalk on commercial lane, you would look at the other side of the street as well, where it could connect directly to Duncan Alley without having to, Duncan Arcade, excuse me, without having to contend with the corner and the garage entrances. And in recent history, both the Jewelry Building, the Lick Building, and 1500 Mount Diablo were approved. Neither of them had a condition that they needed to put a commercial lane sidewalk, nor was it an issue that they abutted, or that at least 1500 abutted hard against commercial lane. And the idea of turning commercial lane into a pedestrian-friendly experience would involve, working with the city traffic engineers, probably putting up temporary bollards and using it for pedestrians at the exclusion of cars and service trucks during some portion of the day, but not all of the day. And we are working to that end. And as you'll see, we've actually accommodated area in our project to store their dumpsters across the street, because that's a big impediment of making a real pedestrian-friendly experience there. Right now, the dumpsters are all on commercial lane right behind those other buildings on the other side of the street. There was questions about the parking requirement. I would just note that 2 levels below grade is as much as we physically can build here, and it's what was contemplated in the specific plan. The requirement that staff is recommending is the midpoint between the 2 most recently approved and adjacent core areas and the more low density parts of Walnut Creek. So if we were in either of the north or west downtown plan, we have more parking than would be the minimum requirement here. So what we are proposing is, we think a reasonable amount from a marketability perspective for these units, and it's satisfying the commercial requirement as it's laid out. I would also note that 1500 Mount Diablo next door obviously paid the in lieu fee, which is really just a financial transaction, doesn't have a single parking spot on that property, and is widely considered one of the most successful projects in downtown Walnut Creek. I know I enjoy it. I'm sure a lot of you do as well. And I, for one, am glad it's there, even though it couldn't provide any on-site parking. So that's how we address the feedback we got from the study session. And let me just quickly use the rest of my time to refresh you on the project. Obviously, we have gotten significantly good feedback on the design that you're seeing here in the rendering. We've got retail on the ground floor as required. We've got a lobby for the indoor-outdoor, I guess I should call it open air restaurant on the roof, coming down commercial lane, hoping to, kind of activate and make that more of a pedestrian friendly, at least at the tongue end of it here, where you also know that 1500 put pavers here. So it's a little nicer at sort of the apron of it than it is all the way back. This is what's here now. We obviously believe that, a project here is a much better thing for the city, even if it is built in phases. This has been like this for decades. There was automotive repair happening that hasn't been happening for years and years. This is just an unreinforced block building, and you've got a privately operated surface lot right now. This was the rendering that Greg showed. So yes, we have the 10 feet of the Paseo exactly where it is planned in the specific plan. The other 10 feet go on this property. And so this would be expanded to 20 feet and turn the corner. We're using that as pedestrian access to the residential lobby, which is back here. And go to the next one. Another important feature of our project, and something that our tenants and residents have found more desirable, or have indicated more desire for, particularly right now, is access to private outdoor space. So we've designed the project specifically so that every unit has private outdoor space. So we've planned the kitchens to be continuous with this private outdoor space, where you have a stacking glass wall and then 6 feet wide of deck that runs the length of the room, that can be closed via the wood slats on the outside of the building or open. And you can see that we have that design so it runs right through. So we think these are very desirable units and programmed so that each one has their own private outdoor space. Here quickly to run back through, this is the ground floor. You've got the ramp back here on commercial. You've got these two spaces where we're hoping to store extra trash from these buildings over here, such that if we could work it out with the neighbors in the city, we could maybe put bollards up and activate commercial lane for part of the day. We've got that PG&E transformer room, which needs to be here, and then access to the garage here. So if the public were coming down the street to go to this garage, they would walk here, come in this exit corridor, and either go down the shuttle elevator or the stair to pick up their car. And this is the access to the roof here, which again is set slightly down commercial lane. This is the footprint of the roof, and this is the area that I think Commissioner Pickett was referring to. So the design here is intentionally set to maximize the enjoyment of the view of Mount Diablo, which is very nice from this height. So the guests come up this elevator, it opens, it looks right out over the neighborhood building up to the mountain. And this is this outdoor space. And this is not tables and chairs like a traditional restaurant space. This is bench seating. And this is really designed such that maybe while you're waiting for your table here, or maybe you just wanted to come up and, sit and relax, or maybe you wanted to come up and just have a drink and sit outside, this is a space to do it. It's not really part of the restaurant's dedicated area. This is designed, programmed to allow the public to use it if they want to. So this is the indoor-outdoor restaurant space here, and here, a little bit of private dining and lounge back here. That is consistent with the rooftop activation provisions in the specific plan. Let's move this. This is a drone shot from that same height, looking out where you would come up the pedestrian elevator. So you obviously see the 1500 project here, Neiman Marcus across the way, and Mount Diablo here. So I think a very nice view that hopefully everybody can enjoy. We've got almost out of time. I just want to point out that this is our garage as proposed. This is our phase of the garage, which could run as a valet indefinitely. This is the wall that is designed to be connected if the other side excavates, and then it would become a shared garage and we would share the entrance ramp. And it's very consistent with the garage that was designed in the specific plan over here. Almost exactly the same overall capacity, just different orientations of the ramp. And that is it. And I guess I'm just about out of time. So also, I just want to mention that we have Alan Moore here, our land use counsel, and our architect, Guy Childress, and we're happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. Before we open to general public comment, does any member of the commission want to ask any questions of the applicant? Oh, come on, somebody?
Where's my hand?
Commissioner Pickett, go ahead.
Of course, I have some questions. Mr. Balducci, you mentioned that Alan Moore and the city attorney came up with some language regarding the guaranteed access. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I see there's a brief comment about it in the conditions of approval. Is there something more than that that's been discussed?
I'll chime in here, Commissioner Pickett. We worked and came up with the condition of approval related to the valet parking program. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking about. With respect to the parking garage, we do have a proposed condition of approval based on your prior comments that can be added to the resolution.
Okay, so that's not in here right now. On the access easement,
Correct.
the access, that's not in here. And what we have in front of us, it's not here, right?
Correct, but we do have language we can add.
Okay. Now, Mr. Balducci, you mentioned that you don't have the room to widen or to accommodate a sidewalk along commercial lane. And having developed property for 40 something years, I know that's not true. You can do that. I know there's room. I've looked at your plans. I know there's room in there. So wouldn't it be more fair to say that you really just don't want to do that? I know it would require a major redesign. It would affect the building all the way up. Well, it actually wouldn't if you did it underneath the canopy like you're doing the existing sidewalk and you created a public easement. But you can't say you can't accommodate it. Is that correct? Can you give us a reason you don't want to accommodate it?
No, I think what we studied it after your comments, and given the requirements for the width of the ramp, the narrowness of the site, and the PG&E transformer room, there's no room left. The ramp can't get any narrower there and still get cars in and still meet the requirement to get cars up and down.
Okay, I'm an amateur architect. I could do it. So if you want to hire me, that's fine. I think that's a disingenuous comment. And so you talked about the rooftop. Area. So is there some kind of document or something that stipulates that will be open to the public during business hours of the restaurant or anything?
I mean, it's designed to be open to the public during business hours.
Okay, so what kind of guarantee do we have, or would you provide or allow to be or consider in the conditions of approval that would assure us that?
Well, we can note it as publicly accessible open space, what do we call those? A POPO, privately owned, publicly accessible open space, but subject to business hours of the restaurant, right? We can't leave that open 24/7.
Of course, I would expect it to be affiliated with oversight and management, and you obviously wouldn't want people up there 24 hours a day. So I would understand that, but I personally could see how it'd be very easy for the restaurant guy to want to start taking control of that and start going out and serving drinks and say, you can't sit here unless you buy a drink or order a hamburger or something. And I would like to avoid that, because I think one of the incentives for the value of this building to the community was that there was going to be this public accessible open space with the great view you just showed us. So I think we need to accommodate that.
Commissioner, I don't want your train of thought, but I'll just add that that's also a condition we can add if that's something that the commission wants to.
Okay, now another question, Mr. Balducci, and Commissioner Ward was asking questions about the paseo on the west side of the building and why that couldn't be shifted, the whole building be shifted or accommodated, and perhaps put the burden of more of the paseo on the other property rather than doing a 50-50. I mean, the way I'd like to see this building done is the whole building would be narrower, that you would accommodate the needs of commercial lane, and you would accommodate the needs of the paseo on both sides of it, and let phase two, come along when they come along. We're relying too much on phase two, but basically the building could shift to the west 10 feet and put the burden on the other property, which of course they'd have to cooperate with. But is there a reason that couldn't work?
We'd need to study it. I think we didn't intend to, where the Paseo was drawn in the specific plan is where it is on our property and where we would expect it to be on the neighbor property. And shifting all 20 feet onto their property was something we didn't consider, taking their property such that we could move open space over to the other side. What we have here is consistent with the specific plan. And it does open up pedestrian access on commercial lane more than was designed in the specific plan.
Yeah, schematically on commercial lane in the specific plan, it shows that there's a setback of the building from the commercial lane right away. And again, that's schematic, just like the Paseo is on the west side. So I think there's a little in continuity there between the philosophy of how you're applying the specific plan. Specific plan does show schematically some space between public right of way and the building face on commercial lane. So I think maybe some redesign might be appropriate for that. But that's all. I'm sorry. That's all my questions.
Okay. Other commissioner questions of the applicant? Okay. Well, seeing none, I've got a couple. I'm struggling a little bit with the parking and the valet parking, and I'm just trying to work my way through this finding about that there's clear and convincing evidence of parking demand, and so I've spent a lot of time looking at this, and I just need a little bit of help from you as an applicant who's living in one of these buildings to explain to me a little bit about how the timing of this works relative to commercial versus residential. I get the valet, but the way I'm understanding this right now is this is a condominium for sale project that the homeowners association would, through their ownership group, which could be a combined owner of both residence and commercial space, is going to hire a valet company. And that valet company is going to have certain criteria in their contract on how they're going to staff and how they're going to handle things. And so in the absence of seeing the detail of that and knowing that the city really doesn't want to ever step in and enforce this, I'm just trying to understand practically, like at certain times of day, there's going to be a lot more commercial demand for this space. And in concept, people would be out at work perhaps and not want to use that space. So there's this kind of combined use. Is there a restriction? I'm a resident and I'm going to come home at a particular time of night on a Friday night. I'm going to come home at 9 o'clock at night. I have to imagine that might be a very popular commercial time of night. Is there a way that I could be guaranteed a parking space in my garage? Or am I going to show up and discover that it's full because there's a lot of commercial demand? So these are the kinds of things I'm just trying to understand in terms of the practice. Because I can understand number of stalls, parking stalls striped and parking demand analysis, but the functionality of how this valet will work is something that I'm still struggling with, and I'm trying to get on board with. So if you could help me, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So just one thing to be clear is our company, we also provide the function of managing these buildings too, and managing the HOAs and managing, the units and coordinating all this. And we also will run the valet garages ourselves. So yes, if you're a resident here who has a right to park, your spot, that capacity is earmarked for you. It's there during peak hours, off-peak hours, and all the time. And so the valets will know the capacity of the commercial parkers. And when that capacity is reached, they're closed for further commercial parking so that we can always accommodate the residents who have a right to park in that garage at all times.
Okay, so that's helpful. So now work with me here. So we have a rooftop restaurant. The rooftop restaurant retail square footage, if I'm looking at the plans right, that's 6,470 square feet of activated open air. Is that the space that Commissioner Pickett is talking about that is more available for the general public, or is that part of the restaurant on the roof? I mean, where I'm going with this is that restaurant space on the roof a commercial condominium? And if it's an active commercial business, then that business is going to have a parking demand associated with it. And I'm trying to understand if the current parking count that we've had represented to us includes the parking count for a restaurant of 6,470 square feet, which during peak time is going to have a larger demand than, say, a regular commercial space. And so, again, I'm just trying to backfill into that we've been provided clear and convincing evidence of the parking demand. And frankly, what we have right now, we're reaching, and I'm trying to get there.
Yeah. So, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong here, but so the parking, the trip generation counts included the sort of leasable commercial area on the roof, and we always have sufficient capacity given the residential and commercial demand that includes the roof. But I believe that technically the required commercial parking does not need to include the activated roof for the Walnut Creek rules and regulations.
That is correct. So it's not included in the parking requirement. It is included in the demand study for depicting whether or not valet would work during the PM peak hours.
So wait a minute, there is no parking requirement here. The parking requirement is to be determined by the Planning Commission at tonight's hearing. Is that fair? No, Ethan's shaking his head. He's saying commercial has a very specific requirement, and only the residential is something that we determine based on really no clear and convincing evidence whatsoever. We just guess, but we decide that it's okay to not count a restaurant square footage on the roof because clearly that's not going to have any parking demand.
Well, the commercial component, as Greg indicated, is 1 per 300 rentable floor area, and open air restaurants and dining of this nature are excluded from that calculation. So similarly, next door at rooftop, that area is not required to have parking. As the applicant alluded, there is no required parking, on-site parking as part of that project. They did pay an in lieu fee for a portion of that building, but not for any of the open air dining areas. And that would be the applicable here as well.
Okay, that's helpful. I think I got the math now. And so then I'm gonna believe that the project itself may be standalone for now and maybe for a long time, but in the event that the adjacent property owner wanted to come forward and build the building according to the larger plan and would come forward in the future with a tentative map, I'm coming back to Bob Pickett's question earlier. How do we legally grant them access to a homeowners association that owns the property? Is there a way that the project today could agree to a different condition or a chain revision to the tentative map that would grant that easement, physically grant that easement, even though it may never be used?
Chair Lezak, are you asking easements with respect to the parking garage?
Yeah, there's on the tentative map, there's a note that reflects the concept that in the future, there might be a second phase. And if that second phase did happen, that second phase would need to somehow connect into the existing garage to combine the two. And right. So while I'm not sure that, we're counting on that as part of this approval, I'm wanting some way of creating that mechanism, because I do think that Commissioner Pickett's right, that in the future, there'll be an owners association there that would would need to grant an easement unless it's granted now. And though it sounds great that Mr. Bolgeschi's company does the management of these, it is not uncommon for homeowners associations to replace management companies over time and to modify things like valet agreements and things like that as their budget may require. So those, I mean, I get it, and I want to figure out a way that we can condition this and create all of these things up front so that these possibilities are left in the future, so that if nobody wants all these downside things to happen, but this is the reason why the attorneys are on this call right now, is because we protect ourselves and the general public for these eventualities. And so I'm looking for, in this particular case, a way to add that as more than just a note. A note on a tentative map doesn't mean that much to me. An easement shown on a tentative map that then is going to be recorded onto a future final map might be something that a future owner could legally use. And I think that's what I'm asking for. And maybe what I'm really asking the applicant is, would they be willing to grant that?
Right. So I would just say our recommendation would be to add a condition of approval that requires the applicant and its heirs and future assigns to grant those reciprocal parking rights and necessary easements to allow for the construction and connection to that garage. So we can provide that language.
I would just point out that we're building both ramps on our side, and the overall fully phased would require that the valet capacity that we're getting rid of move to spots on the other side. So we would be giving an easement for access use of the ramps and the connection, and we would be needing to get, and in return, we need to get those spots that would be the offset, the trade-off there. A condition that said that we have no issues with. I mean, it's not our intent here to trick anybody or to create a project that's going to fail.
And I'm not trying to suggest that. I'm working really hard to try to get there, and I understand what you're saying, and that there's something that's needed to offset that. That's part of some level of design that you've really done. So if we get there and the commissioners are so inclined, I'm going to suggest that the city attorney works to try to craft some language like that. I'm fine with the concept that it be granted in the future, but a number of these things I think need to be looked at a little bit closer in terms of slightly better conditions than what we've got. And if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind hearing from your attorney, Mr. Moore, a little bit about the conditions relative to the valet parking. And that is only because, clearly I'm concerned that the association in the future would modify that. And you guys obviously heard that and worked hard to create some conditions. I see that in the resolution. I'm not sure that this feels strong enough to me. But I understand you thought about it. I'd like to hear how you got there.
If I may interrupt just quickly, Chair Lezak. A point that's been made by the city engineer reminding me is that the parcels will need to merge per the California Building Code, because you can't have a property line between two buildings. You can't have an access. You can't have that. You can't have that property line between the two buildings. So you would have a tentative map for the second parcel and then a merger of the parcels, such that you have one property. Relative to the garage, you can't have a property line splitting the two halves.
So wait a minute. So what we're saying is the parking garage itself would be considered a building, a structure like a U occupancy garage, if it did that. And so that, okay, well, I'm not sure that it had to be, because I'm not sure that they're physically going to tie together. I mean, if it's a PT slab on the second floor, I'm not sure anybody's going to, okay. I mean, that's fine. I suppose that the condition can be written to contemplate that. I just think that there needs to be some future right here. I just don't feel very comfortable with the idea of I mean, if this was truly just, we all agreed that this was never, the phase 2 was never going to happen, I would understand. But I'm just trying to look for ways to ensure that that could happen, and that the future owner who's already going to be struggling, they've got a lot of parking to build. Obviously, you've done the hard work of building the ramps for them, but they got their own parking to do, and they have a lot less residential units to pay for that parking. So it's already questionable to me how they would do that. I'm just trying to bridge that gap. So if I got that. So if we don't mind, if we could come back to Mr. Moore in the idea of trying to keep this moving, and see what you can tell me a little bit more about the conditions on the valet parking.
Yes, Ethan, is it okay if I just go ahead? Just making sure, can everybody hear me? I unmuted myself. Can all you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So our office worked carefully and a long time with the staff and the city attorney's office on the condition of approval for valet parking, given the comments that were received from the study session and even before the study session. And, you know, I'm looking at the final product of an agreeable condition that we would agree to. It would take a few minutes to read it. I know City Attorney Hickey has a copy, and we have fully agreed with it. What it does is it gives, and it's in my legal view, in my firm's legal view, and every attorney who's looked at its legal view, it gives the independent enforceability of that valet parking requirement, and also further the enforceability through the CC&Rs. It indicates clearly that the HOA will be solely responsible for the operation and maintenance of the valet parking on the site, and that the city, acting through its planning commission, you all, and in consultation with the traffic engineer, has full authority under the CUP and the minor use permit to require changes to the valet parking. And these things are going to be put into the CC&Rs, not only independently enforceable, but put in the CC&Rs. And these provisions in the CC&Rs shall be independently enforceable by the city. In the event that the HOA fails to establish or maintain valet parking program in any way, the city also retains any and all additional rights it has. And we're willing to have these things set forth as a condition of approval and enforceable through the CC&Rs. And as doing this for, I guess, 42 years now, I can assert, claim, warrant that this is an enforceable condition, and we agree to it. I would add that these folks, David and his group, they worked hard, and I sat in when they worked hard on listening to your comments in the study session and addressing those comments, from setbacks to these conditions to the other things. They worked hard in a sincere way to accomplish what you desired. And this is only one instance. The other things I hear you saying with regard to public access to the roof area, they can easily be established by condition. And as I sat on your commission for, I guess, 12 years, we did it often, and we did it successfully. And if people departed from those conditions, we held them accountable. So on that issue as well, we fully agree with the condition of approval ensuring public use and access of that rooftop. Any other like concern or something, we can address by condition, and we can make them enforceable in a way that you'll have the comfort level you need. I'm very confident of that. Thank you for asking me the question to let me explain those things. Mr.
Chair Lezak, may I ask a question of Mr. Moore?
Yes, I'm finished with my questions, and I'll turn it back to Commissioner for a question. And so, yes, Mr. Commissioner Pickett, go ahead.
Okay, on the enforceability by the city, what is the hammer that the city has? I mean, do they take over the valet deal and charge the HOA? Do they red tag the building? What is the enforcement tool that the city has to address a violation of the valet requirement?
Well, it's the, forgive me, shall I go ahead? Or
Yeah,
Brian?
Go ahead, Alan. I can
Right.
supplement.
Brian, I described it, so I'll let you answer first and I'll chime in that we concur because we
Sure.
do concur with your language.
Yeah, I mean, so it would be escalating, right? The hope would be based on this condition that the traffic engineer would, if there were issues, the traffic engineer would be able to establish communication with the HOA, have a dialogue, communicate what, you need more staff on Friday nights, you need more staff on Saturday nights, whatever that need is. If that doesn't work, then the planning commission retains jurisdiction to come in and mandate changes to the valet parking program. Ultimately, the place you'd hope you never got to is the city's own municipal code designates violations of the zoning ordinance as a nuisance. So at the end of the day, if we couldn't get voluntary compliance, we could basically treat it as a nuisance and enforce it as a nuisance, meaning we could issue citations, we could ultimately abate the nuisance through court proceedings. We could try to get injunctive relief. Those provisions do provide for attorney's fees. So the city, if the city had to go that route, we would also be seeking attorney's fees to, in addition to actually trying to abate that nuisance. So it would basically be a nuisance abatement at some point if we got to that.
Okay, that's helpful.
I would add that we agreed fully to those conditions beyond what I've ever seen, but we've agreed and we are, that is in writing in the condition that Brian drafted.
That we don't have, correct? That we have not, we don't have those, correct?
No, this is in the resolution you have before.
Yeah, the valet parking conditions are in section 5 of the CUP MUP resolution.
It's on page 11 of the
Or, I'm
resolution.
sorry, I think I just gave you the wrong section number there, Commissioner.
I guess I didn't.
Section 3, number 2.
Yeah, I guess I didn't read all of what Alan's dissertation was into the way the condition was written, but another question of Mr. Moore, how does the merger of parcels work? If they merge the parcels, we've got 2 separate owners. I mean, is it like tenants in common? Do they own a different, do they have to form a company to own the property? What is the title work that's behind merging the parcels between 2 owners and them having some kind of an understanding and agreement to own a parcel together?
Okay, so in my practice, I've done several dozens of mergers like this, but given that there's a specific protocol here, I'd be more comfortable with David Balducci answering that specifically how he sees it for this project, because I haven't been asked earlier as part of this project to determine how that would go. So David, are you still here? Can you respond to Commissioner Pickett on that issue?
Yeah, I am here. I think this would be, akin to sort of an airspace parcel. This would be a commercial condo unit that would be the below grade garage that would be merged to allow the cross property line traffic.
Is that, we got 2 attorneys here. Is that legal? Is that a legal interpretation of the ownership?
It might be, yes, certainly.
But the building is above ground, and that's where the issue is with regards to the property line. Are you sure that's legal?
I'm sorry, I'm not asking. I'm wondering if you're asking Brian Hickey. I'll let him.
I'll ask either attorney who can answer that question. You got 1 ownership. Parcels are merged. It's 1 parcel.
My
Correct?
understanding would be that the entire parcel would be merged at the ground level.
Right. So that would necessitate the 2 owners having some kind of an agreement between them for a joint ownership, correct?
Correct.
It may, yeah, it very well may, but I mean, much like an airspace conduit arrangement. You would
It's not like an airspace condo. It's a piece of land that's owned by two people. So it's not an airspace condo. Maybe the attorneys can dig into that a little deeper, not tonight. The last question of Mr. Moore or Mr. Hickey, it's been my experience, and I've done mostly residential subdivisions, a few office spaces, none of which were condominiumized. But it was my understanding in the past that conditions of approval go away upon recording of the final map. And what has to happen is that when the final map is recorded, all of the conditions of approval have to be incorporated somehow in that recording, because you can't go back and enforce the conditions of a tentative map on somebody in the future once the project has gone forward beyond the final map. Has that law changed?
Well, some of these conditions will still remain in the use permit.
Yes,
And they'll be enforceable through the permit.
they run through the CUP.
Okay, so conditions that are relevant to the CUP, obviously those are ongoing, but is there any conditions relevant to the tentative map that we're talking about here that would be, again, I believe that my understanding and the way I've always done it is that the conditions of approval have no enforceability. They need to be incorporated into the final map. That would be like the easement that's necessary
Right.
to go through the garage to get to the other parcel.
So with respect to the parking garage, so the recommendation would be that there would be a condition of approval added to the use permit tonight that states that the applicant will grant all necessary easements and reciprocal parking, will cooperate, and we can provide that language. So that language would be enforceable through the use permit. At the time that maps are finalized, all those easements would be incorporated into the map. So you'd have redundancy in the sense that you'd have a requirement to cooperate through the use permit. And once you got to the point of tentative and then final mapping, presumably the requirement in the CUP would then be carried forward into the maps, and those easements would be reflected in the map.
All right, I think we got a long road to hoe to get through all that stuff, but those, I'm sorry to interrupt at Peter's juncture here, but there were legal questions and we had the guys on the speaker, so I wanted to clarify those.
And so if you're finished for now, Commissioner Pickett, we are still in the public hearing portion where we are talking, kind of asking questions of the applicant following their presentation. So I'm going to go back to the rest of the commission. Do other commissioners have questions of the applicant that they'd like to ask now? Anyone? And seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward to the general public comment period and ask the commission secretary, are there any members of the general public who have raised their hands and would like to make comment at this time? And if so, please state your name for the record and recognize that you have up to 3 minutes to comment.
So looking over the list of attendees, there are no members on that list, of which there are only 2 people. No one is raising a hand, and therefore I don't believe we have any public comment on this item. And double checking the written, we have received no written comment either from the public on this item.
Okay, so we will come back to the applicant and see if the applicant would like to perhaps not rebut any of the public comment, but would like to make any closing remarks before we close the public hearing.
Sure, if I may.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Look, we've worked hard on this project for many years. We view this as a very good thing for the city of Walnut Creek. It is complicated given that the specific plan envisioned forcing the mergers of 2 parcels. That hasn't happened, isn't happening, and we're trying to do everything we can to not foreclose the development of the other parcel, and no one's trying to hide the ball or play any games. We fully want both developed, but we just, they have a lease next door, and what they do is what they're going to do. We do think that a project like this would be a great signal in Walnut Creek that it's open for business, and we'd very much like to construct this and deliver it as designed, as expeditiously as we can.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will close the public hearing and we will come back to the commissioners for commissioner deliberation, comments, motions. Who would like to start? Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment briefly on the valet dispute or comments that we're having here. So I'm an HOA attorney by day, and I'm not going to speak in that capacity because that's not the hat I'm wearing right now. But I will tell you that my clients are the whole gamut of homeowners associations, including high-rise and mid-rise mixed-use buildings in San Francisco and other cities. And most of those buildings have valet programs or other parking control programs that they use, and that they are included in conditions of approval and maps and in the CCNRs and in all these different ways that they're enforced. And there's really not a problem in implementing and continuing those programs. People don't just give up on their valet programs and refuse to pay for them and move along. It's an essential service that homeowners are being assessed for, or the commercial owners. And it's part of the amenities of the building and part of the job of the association to do that, and they do it. Sometimes we see difficulties between various parties in mixed use, but they work those out with the contracts between them and the association's governing documents. And so it's really not, I don't see it as an issue. I'm not concerned at all about the valet program that's included in this plan. I think it's actually really great because it makes us seem like a much more sophisticated and innovative and forward-thinking community that's maximizing our parking situation and being flexible in terms of how the parking works, because the valets ensure that. So I just wanted to share my experience in that regard, not my legal opinion, but my experience, and to say that I know that some people have concerns about it, and that may be because we don't have as many valet programs in our residential mixed use buildings here in Walnut Creek, but in other cities it's been going on forever, and it's not a problem. So that's my comment with regard to the valet. Thank you.
Okay, other commissioner comments or Commissioner Anderson? You're on mute. There you go.
I guess that there are two things that concern me. One previously was the fact there's been improvements made there, and I would like to see a bit more, but I'm satisfied that that's going to be sufficient. The other is the valet, and it's difficult. I appreciate Commissioner Ward's experience there. My concern is that it's something that is necessary on a temporary basis, and it's not the intent that it be permanent. They go on for many years. The question is, can it effectively go on for many years? I'm a little concerned that that we're.
I need to interrupt. I can't understand a lot of what you're saying. I don't know if I'm the only one having that.
No, agree.
Breaking up. I'm not getting your whole sentences.
Okay. That might be more me than the machinery. So my concern is that I don't see a clear way of providing some kind of safeguard that the valet will work on a long-term basis. If it is necessary for things to work, I assume that the people paying for that service will continue to do so. But it's not an ideal situation. I'm not sure what, let me know what it is. We try to seek a better solution.
I don't know about other people. I couldn't hear more than half of what you said. I'm sorry.
Chair
How do we deal with that, Ethan?
Yeah, I was going to say, Chair Lezak, if it could offer perhaps to have Commissioner Anderson dial in to the meeting. I can actually point out Greg Kapovich is dialed in separately on his phone, though obviously his visual is through his computer. If you could dial in to the meeting, and we will then bring your phone into the meeting to enable your, hopefully, to improve your audio, because it was difficult to hear. We can come back to you if it's okay by the chair later for your comments to make sure we capture them, but
yeah, if you don't mind, Commissioner Anderson, we would like you to call in, because I do think that you're having a little bit of a signal problem, and you probably will get a better signal on your phone. In the meantime, if you don't mind, we'll see if we can pick up another commissioner's comments while you're calling in, and then we'll go right back to you. Would another commissioner like to make a few comments while Commissioner Anderson calls in?
I'm ready to go.
Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, so there's still issues I have that I consider, at least to me, are inadequately resolved. And on the CUP resolution, on page 7, finding 2, that requires us to make a finding that it is not detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare. I think the condition being designed on commercial lane is in fact detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare. And I think it exposes the city to liability. On page 8, finding 1, I can't make that finding. I don't believe there is clear and convincing evidence. I believe that the information given to us is not totally applicable to this situation. And I couldn't make that finding on this. And let's see, condition 3 or finding 3, I'm sorry, on page 10 about permitting valet. I oppose the valet service. I don't think it's functional. I don't think it's appropriate for Walnut Creek. It may work in San Francisco. It's not appropriate in Walnut Creek in this day and age. Maybe in 30 years it might be, but today it's not an appropriate solution to parking in Walnut Creek. I believe that the project as proposed is inconsistent with the specific plan, and I think we need to respect the effort that went into developing a specific plan for this area. It does not merge the parcels as contemplated. It does not contribute to activating commercial lane as contemplated. The specific plan specifically identifies parking as a problem. That was in objective circulation 2 of the specific plan. This proposal flies right in the face of that provision of the specific plan, and it does not accommodate activation of commercial lanes. So I think there's at least 4 major areas where this application and this design totally ignores the intent of the specific plan. I would like to see the project get built. I think it's a gorgeous project. I think it's a attractive project. I like the idea of the rooftop area, but I think they need to accommodate the parking on site without valet. And I would only approve it if they come up with a solution to that. I think they need a full width sidewalk along commercial lane, and I'd approve a project that included that. We already talked about providing some kind of assurance on the rooftop public access, which we don't have available to us this evening to approve anything. We don't have documents that we have reviewed, although our attorney may have one. We haven't seen it regarding access through the phase 1 parking lot to phase 2. And I think I need to have a little more understanding of how the ownership structure is going to work and how it relates to access between the buildings. And if you merge the parcels, how the ownership is going to work. And that's a big blank. And I think there's just too many loose ends on this that haven't been thoroughly vetted, that haven't been presented to us for review, that I couldn't approve the project. on what we have before us tonight. And I just think that there's a lot of redesign that would be necessary in order to satisfy what I think are deficiencies in this project.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Commissioner Pickett. We'll check with the commission secretary, or do we have Commissioner Anderson on the phone? That's a nod?
Yes, he simply needs to unmute his phone and should be good, hopefully.
Okay, Commissioner Anderson, we'll go back to you now.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So I had, hang on, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Some way I can fix that? I'm just going to try to talk through my own echo.
Grant, can you turn down your computer audio?
How about that? Does that help? Okay. I'll try to shorten my comments this time.
Now we're not getting you at all.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
A little bit of an echo, but go ahead.
Okay. On the
Now we're struggling with you a little bit. We're not hearing you.
Okay. Not.
I'm sorry, we still can't hear you.
Let me try.
All right, in the meantime, let's see if we can't pick up a few others. Who's next? Come on, Commissioner Strongman, I can see you on the edge of your chair there. You're bouncing out. Commissioner Reiser.
Yeah, since I'm probably on the other side of the spectrum here, I remain as I was, I think, 59 days ago when we were first at this project. I remain in favor of the project. I think that they're working with a challenging and constrained site. I think everybody here agrees that it's a beautiful project. I want to reiterate that it did work. As I said last time, I think it worked as a standalone project. I like the flexible space on Commercial Lane. I think they've provided for that recessed pedestrian path between Mount Diablo and getting to their underground parking garage. I think even if Commercial Lane were made into like a maiden lane, I'm not sure we're going to get a sidewalk to go all the way down there anyway. I think they accommodated for themselves. And if we did require a sidewalk on Commercial Lane, I think it makes sense that it's on the other side. It doesn't make sense to continue a sidewalk past the two huge garage entrances that would be the ingress and egress from that garage. I'm fine with the density. I'm fine with how the sidewalk setbacks. I think that's it. I'm in favor of the project.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and Commissioner Strongman, I see you're on the edge of your chair now.
Finally on the edge of my chair. I am supporting the project. I have no problem with the valet parking. If we keep denying valet parking in Walnut Creek, we'll never get to that 35 years when we'll have it acceptable. I think they work very hard on it. It works well as a standalone project. I don't see the need for a requirement of a sidewalk on Commercial Lane, and that nobody's going to walk on the sidewalk. We're going to be walking down it, and there'll be we will have to deal with cars if they're cars, which it's not unlikely. We'll probably have some sort of like Maiden Lane in San Francisco where it's blocked off most of the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll check back with Commission Secretary. I'm on the edge here. Is Commissioner Anderson with us?
It appears Commissioner Anderson is with us. Could you give us an audio check, Commissioner Anderson?
Your cell phone's on mute right now, Commissioner Anderson.
Your cell phone as through Zoom is on mute.
How about now?
There we go.
There you go.
That work? Okay, wonderful. So I got two comments. One is regarding the front setback. I saw some improvement from the previous one. Would have liked a little bit more, but I think what has been done is sufficient for me at least. The real concern I have is well, it sort of starts out with the valet parking, which is appropriate as a temporary measure. Not so great an idea perhaps as a permanent measure. If it were to turn into a permanent measure or a very long-term measure, it may still work, but it's not what was really intended for that, I think. It's really intended to be set up to integrate with phase 2. And that gets into the larger question. I think Commissioner Pickett made some good points about this, which is, how do we know phase 2 is going to happen? How is it going to happen related to phase 1? To what extent are we committing phase 2 to an integrated solution with phase 1? And the valet parking is just something I think that kind of brings that whole question out. So for me, I agree with Commissioner Pickett that I would like to see more information, more negotiation, more agreement between the owners and with the city as to how phase 2 is going to progress. And that was pretty much my comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. So please stay with your phone. If you don't mind muting your phone for now, but stay with us there for continued conversation here. And so it looks like, how about Commissioner Kraselic, Vice Chair Kraselic, you ready?
Thank you, Chair. I haven't heard that there's been any objections to this project from the other property owners, so I can only believe that they've been in conversations with David and that they understand how this whole thing is moving forward. I would like to thank David and his team for all the hard work they've put into this project. I think they've done a really great job with what they have to work with. My only other comment is, I know of absolutely no sidewalks currently existing along the commercial lane alley anywhere between Mount Diablo and Civic. There are numerous 2- and 3-story buildings built right up on the property line. There are numerous parking lots built up on the parking lots built right up on the property line. Some buildings have built a 3 or 4 foot sidewalk on their side of the property line, and then they've planted trees in the middle. So those aren't really sidewalks. They're just building setbacks, in my opinion, that have been paved with concrete. So this is a service alley for trash trucks and service trucks and parking and people to get into the back of the stores, all up and down the alley. So it would be nice in the future if that just became a public walkway, but not in my lifetime. So I think David and his team have done a really good job in trying to accommodate as much as they can on this site, and I'm in support of the project.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll go ahead and follow through with my comments. I share a lot of Commissioner Pickett's concerns. I know you heard that all from me at the study session. I spent a lot of time with staff, and I've really gone through this quite a bit, and I'm a lot more comfortable at this point with the parking demand calculations. It's a little bit challenging because we're trying to make a finding without a tremendous amount of specific documentation. I'm having to rely on the fact that others have made findings in the North Downtown and West Downtown specific plans to allow for a reduced parking demand in those areas as the evidence that would be able to get us to reducing the parking number that is required of our finding. I look forward to staff spending some time and money doing some additional parking studies in town, so we'd really have that information, because that would make me a lot more comfortable. But I think I can be comfortable with the valet parking with the additional conditions that we've proposed. Obviously, like everyone else, I think the building is really interesting. I think it would be great to have this building. Frankly, I think maybe there's more retail than we even need. I'm a big residential housing guy, as you all know, and think that we need more residential housing. So I look forward to that. I am concerned about the commercial lane, and I do share Commissioner Pickett's concerns, but I have to rely on city staff, the engineering and public safety departments to have reviewed that. And if they're supportive of it, then I can get there. I actually love David's idea of putting up pylons during portions of the day and having some outdoor activation space and a number of other things that he's already thought of and proposed. In order to be okay with this specific plan concept, I would like there to be at least the potential for phase 2 to happen. I can be comfortable that with the concept that phase 1 or phase 2 may never happen, because I get it and I do see that, but I would like to see a very detailed condition about the ownership. And if I'm understanding the building code properly, it isn't just an airspace condo, it's an actual merger of parcels. And so that's some more challenging condition of approval in the CUP language that does, I think, need to be agreed to by various attorneys, because it needs to run with the land and be something that can be, whether it's just in the CUP or whether we even require it to be in the CCNRs. I'm not sure exactly what the appropriate mechanism there is, but it needs to be clear to any future buyer of the condominium, not just buried in a CUP they'll never see, that would be a condition. I like the idea of conditioning the rooftop space. It's something that the applicant has already seems to be comfortable with. And so there's a number of these things that I feel like, even though I do have issues with the project, I feel like we could get there through conditioning the project as opposed to having to deny the project. So my question for others before I would propose or have anyone else propose a motion is, what would those additional conditions that we want to be if we were to go there? And are those conditions that we think are challenging enough, and maybe I'm going to defer to the city attorney here for just a minute, that is this something that we would want to continue this item and have them come back to us with this language? And I know as an applicant, I would never want that. So I would want my vote if I could get it. So is there some language that the city attorney would want to play with here and maybe work with the applicant's attorney, or is this something that is complicated enough that we need to come back to?
So I'm going to start by deferring to the commission secretary with respect to the public access on the rooftop. And then while that's, I think he has some proposed language for that condition. And my recommendation would be that could be a condition added on page 12 of the CUP minor use permit. And it would just go on page 12 between number 3 and number 4. So I'll let the commission secretary read that language. In the meantime, I do have some proposed language that I'm going to send now to the applicant's attorney. And then I'm also I can read that into the record as well shortly here.
Thank you. With your permission, Chair Lezak, I do have some proposed language, but I want to be clear if there were other, we've heard at least two conditions that we're prepared to read, but are there others that we should be contemplating? Rooftop space, access to the rooftop space, we've heard is one. The connection between the two garages below grade and the rights necessary to be conferred thereupon upon property owners. Are there others that we should also be thinking about, or should I simply read the condition as proposed? I'll defer to you for direction.
I am not sure that the general rest of the commission is going to want to move in the direction of shifting the building to accommodate a sidewalk or any condition like that. And even if we went there, I'm not sure that would be enough for Commissioner Pickett to get comfortable with this project tonight. So I'm going to suggest, at least for me, those, in addition to the valet conditions that you've already added, those two additional conditions are things that I'd look for. And I'll look for anybody else to raise their hand if they have anything else they want to add. I'm not seeing anybody, so let's go ahead, Commissioner. Commissioner Crusella.
Chair Lezak, I would just agree. Those are the two that I would consider.
Okay, Commission Secretary, we will let you give a shot to the rooftop access condition.
Sure, thank you. And I'll just read, it's a rather simple, straightforward, but here we go. The rooftop deck located atop Building 1 of Phase 1 shall remain open and accessible to the public at all hours, during which any commercial tenant remains open within Building 1. It's relatively simple. I'll read it again just for the benefit of the commission in case someone missed a bit. The proposed apologies.
Excuse me for just a moment as well. You know, when we're done with both of these conditions, I want to step just briefly outside of our commission deliberation to make sure that either the applicant or his attorney can both acknowledge that they would be okay with this language. We understand that they're okay with the valet language, but I want to make sure that if there's, you know, if A, that they're comfortable with these things, and B, that the language specifically is something that they can live with before we take our vote.
Shall I reread the condition one more time for the benefit of everyone?
Yes, please.
Okay. Proposed draft condition relative to public access. The rooftop deck located atop Building 1 of Phase 1 shall remain open and accessible to the public at all hours, during which any commercial tenant remains open within Building 1.
So
I think you need to refer to that as, you say any commercial tenant, that could be somebody on the first floor.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should
qualify that as a rooftop tenant.
It's specific to the rooftop tenant. That's right. Great.
Okay, I think we were perhaps going for a broader, I think it was intentional that we had all commercial tenants, but if the direction is to narrow that.
I think, you know, to be fair to the security of the owners of this building, if the rooftop deck is open generally to the public through a commercial use, then it should be open to all of the public. And if for some reason it's closed, I think it would be unfair to have that space open. I mean, I'm not really sure what's really the right thing here, but it seems a little strange to me that, you know, maybe somebody's open downstairs and the roof is closed and people are up.
I think for security purposes, it needs to be connected to the rooftop tenant only.
Fair enough.
That's kind of where I was leading when I was discussing that.
I'd like to take a stab at then revising, if I may, on the fly. The rooftop deck located atop Building 1 of Phase 1 shall remain open and accessible to the public at all hours, during which the rooftop commercial tenant remains open within Building 1.
Okay, so that seems reasonable and appropriate to me. And now let's see, are you, Assistant City Attorney Hickey, are you ready wow us with your other condition, or are we still working on that?
I think we're ready. I'm going to defer to Alan Moore as to whether he heard the last condition that was read into the record, and if at this point he can effectively put that one to bed and verbalize that they agree to that condition. I'm not sure. We're communicating, so I don't know if you heard that, but Alan, you're on mute.
Yes, I concur. Normally in a room without the Zoom, I could look and see David's Balducci's nodding his head. I'm not sure he is, but I would concur. David, is that fine with you? Yes.
Can I speak?
Yes.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the area on the plans designated as the outdoor building deck, the part to the right as you exit along Mount Diablo.
Correct.
Then yes.
Okay.
And I don't know if it would be appropriate as a follow-up to this to put some shading or something on a set of plans to make it a little bit more visually clear. I don't think for this exercise tonight we need to see that, but if that's something that the applicant would want to ensure that's made clear, if the language is, then I'm okay with that.
Fine with me.
Assistant City Attorney Hickey, now back to you.
So I'm going to propose, based also in part on Commissioner Pickett's comment and maybe your comment too, Chair Lezak, that this condition, you want to not only see it in the CUP, but also in the CC&Rs. And so I'm going to propose that on pages 11 and 12, number 2, starting on page 11 and moving on to page 12, it mostly deals with the valet parking, but at the very bottom, it says prior to recordation, applicant will submit its CC&Rs, and it'll ensure that the following provisions and notifications are included in such CC&Rs. And so I would add this bullet point as well, and I'll read it into the record. Applicant, its heirs, successors, and assigns acknowledge that Phase 2 of the project requires construction of a parking garage with 2 levels of subterranean parking on the Phase 2 site that is intended to connect to the parking garage and subterranean parking constructed on the Phase 1 site. Applicant, its heirs, successors, and assigns shall grant all necessary easements and reciprocal parking rights necessary to construct and connect the Phase 2 parking garage to the Phase 1 parking garage in a manner that allows for the combined Phase 1 and Phase 2 garages to operate as a singular shared parking structure for both sites.
And I concur with that one as well.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Commissioner Pickett.
I understand that language, and it's very clear to me, but does something need to be done on the tentative map also, besides the note that's on the tentative map?
I'm going to tell you that I don't think so, and that's because I don't think that the mapping element right now is going to be what's going to make this happen. I think this is going to move forward from a tentative map to a final map and a condo plan, and condos are going to be sold. And I think the biggest concern I have now that we're really talking this language is condominium buyers are going to have a loan, a mortgage taken out on their property, and that lender is going to have a lien on that property. And in order for this property to be merged with another property, in order for a building to be built, which is consistent with the California Building Code, the properties will have to merge. And the lenders of those properties are all going to have to make some kind of a revision to their liens on that property in order for that to happen. And I'm fairly certain that that's more complicated than the applicant's going to want. So This is language I'm a little bit concerned about because what you described, Assistant City Attorney Hickey, sounds really nice and clean about easements and things, but the code makes this much more complicated, I think, than something that we can solve here. Right?
The condos will not be sold. There will be no lenders on condominium units at the time the building permit is issued for phase one. The merger of the properties has to occur prior to the building permit being issued for the building at all. They won't have any pre-sales on anything, and there won't be any private lenders involved in the deal at that time. So going back to my question on the tentative map, does anything need to be, in addition to the CC&R provision, does anything need to be done on the tentative map when the tentative map is turned into a final map and we now have one parcel before the building permit, before any sales or anything else? We need to do anything on the tentative map and the final map to accommodate this requirement.
See, I don't see the phasing happening that way, and I maybe at this point we'll let the applicant or his attorney step in. But the way I see this happening is this project moves forward as phase one, and there is no movement on phase two. There is no merger of parcel whatsoever until sometime in the future that the phase two owner is ready to go. And what we're trying to do is accommodate that phase two person with at least the possibility of a project that is consistent with the specific plan. And that's where I was trying to go with this, to try to have specific plan conformance. And the challenge is I don't see that happening within the time frame that this project wants to move forward. I mean, this project is going to move forward with a final map in the next year, and it's going to build a building and then, 18 months or 2 years later. So 3 years from now, you're going to have condo owners purchasing and setting liens against that parcel. And I think that's the, it's the subordination clause that's needed for those liens that I think really screws up that makes this language much more complicated, if you will, than what I originally envisioned.
Well, I understood it from the city engineers that the parcels need to be merged before the building permit can be issued. And if the city engineer looks like they're online, they can clarify whether I understood that correctly or not.
I think it had to be merged before a building permit could be issued for a combined parking garage, i.e. for phase two. So phase one could move forward as it is today under its current tentative map and final map without needing any of this at all. All this was really because the applicant is working really hard to try to accommodate our interest in having phase two. And now we've made that accommodation much more complicated with silly things like conditions of approval.
Okay, maybe our attorneys can clarify that. Or the city engineer.
Well, I'll just chime in that I concur with Chair Lezak's statements in that regard. David, I know you were trying to say something earlier. Feel free.
Yeah, go ahead, David. We'll give you the floor. You're on mute.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I think Chairman Lezak, these parking rights are not going to be deeded parking rights. They're going to be parking licenses. So your license and it'll be subject to movement, and we'll move you from a valet spot to a permanent spot. And I also wanted to comment on Mr. Hickey's language. I would just like it if we could reference the parking allocations that Greg has on page 16 of the July 9 staff report, such that we're required to cooperate to achieve that same parking via the easements we would provide.
I was wondering if we might, Chair Lezak, invite Kathleen Tarantieff, who's the senior engineer and liaison from the engineering division to the Planning Commission.
I would be very open to having her join us with any comments or clarifications she could give at this time.
Hey, Commissioners, my name is Kathleen Tarantieff. I'm senior engineer in the Public Works Department. My understanding is similar to what Chair Lezak has said, that the lot line, the merger of the two parcels would not need to occur until the second phase came in and that connection between the underground connection between the two garages were to occur. It would not need to occur prior to that.
Thanks for clarifying that. I misunderstood.
I just have this last one because I want to come back and see if we can finalize this and call it a night soon. So if I don't know, you're not the building official, but the concept that I'm imagining is that the building code requires the building that is connection to all to be one merged parcel. And I think what David was contemplating instead was that there's an underground condominium for, instead of a parcel merger, he was going to merge the condominiums that are parking. And I'm not sure that that would satisfy the building code for the issuance of the combined garage.
That is my understanding as well. You know, I'm not as familiar, I'm not the building official, but in speaking with him, the requirement was that there could not be a property line at that opening between the two structures.
Unless perhaps they were structurally two separate buildings and it just happened to be an opening that had an easement across it. So again, you know, that we're getting super into the weeds here, and I hate to disrupt the project if we can come to some agreement on some language, but I don't want to make it so that the future phase 2 can't be built. And I also don't want to put the applicant in a situation where they would be at odds or have troubles getting lenders to lend on their condos because of some condition we've created. So I'm open to suggestions. We'll come back to you, Assistant City Attorney Hickey. This is why you're here. So what do you think?
Going back to the language that I read into the record, it requires the applicant to grant all necessary easements and reciprocal parking rights necessary to construct and connect the phase 2 parking garage to the phase 1 parking garage. In my opinion, that language is broad enough to encompass either a single building, or if there is a way under the building code to build two structures, and that's okay with design review, and that's okay when this project comes back to the Planning Commission for phase 2. This language is intended to not foreclose that opportunity, if that makes sense.
All right, I don't want to overthink this. I want to keep this moving. So I see Alan Moore nodding his head. I don't know how you feel about this, David. I do know that David asked Assistant City Attorney Hickey that we add to whatever language you had just provided, language regarding the phasing of the parking spaces to ensure that if that does happen in the future, that they would be able to retain the additional parking that they need from an equitable trade for that. I'm sensing that maybe he could be okay with this language got it there. So could you give that a shot and see if?
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm not clear. My understanding is that once these garages are combined, whether they're one building or they're a combined parking, once they're combined, that there'll be reciprocal parking rights across both parcels. That's my understanding.
You know, I truly think what has to happen is the parcels have to merge in order for the phase 2 to get a building permit to build a garage that's physically connected to the first building. And that it's part of that merger, at that point, there could easily be a reallocation of parking spaces, et cetera, especially since they're not deeded. Where this gets complicated is we don't know what that looks like, and we're trying to make sure that others in the future are forced to accommodate these things, because none of us will be here and the applicant will have sold this to others. So I I'm generally okay with your language being the way it is. I'm just concerned that I don't want to, you know, we always end up with these unintended consequences in these conversations. I'm trying to avoid that.
I don't want to put Alan Moore on the spot, but I believe he may be working on some revisions to my language.
Go ahead, Alan. Go ahead. You have the floor. Give it a shot.
So I agree with both of you. Brian, I think your language is broad enough, but just to make it clear, if you could accommodate Dave's minor change within your language, just any reference, as he said, a couple of words to your existing language, and I think we're there. And David, maybe you can hear this and state it in a way where it's only 2 or 3 word changes to what Brian stated, because I do agree it's broad language. And he said it on the record that it's broad.
Brian, you're up again.
I thought. Sorry, I guess I want to get some clarity from Mr. Balducci as to what he wants inserted here.
There's a parking allocation that happens when both projects are built. That's outlined on page 16 of Greg's July 9 memo. And as Mr. Lezak was stating, that's sort of the equitable trade. We grant the easements for access, deal with all the property line issues, and then the parking allocations across the entire lot are as outlined in Greg's memo.
And the reason this is important, Brian, is because at that point, the valet parking is supposed to go away. They're not just supposed to pick up 2 parking stalls or whatever. There's supposed to be a full reallocation. So the valet goes away and they get a certain number of parking stalls.
Greg, can you help me out there with what those allocations specifically are?
Yeah, I'm on page 9 of the original staff report from July, David. I'm not seeing what you're referencing here.
I think you want to go to probably even the table on page 16, where you have this parking phase 1 and phase 2 together. I'm not sure exactly which one of these completely represents that, but somewhere in there, this is, I think, where we were trying to go.
Okay, I see.
There is a statement.
David,
Sorry,
I see
I'm
David
just saying-
giving the thumbs up. David, you're still mute.
The second table on page 16, I think I referenced the wrong page, where there would be sorry, 38. I actually think it's in the drawings, not so clear in this table, but I think what we're talking about is the same thing. It's just that so long as we have to grant the easements, so long as the parking is in accordance with the combined parking allocations for phase 1 and 2 in the project approvals here.
And I think what David is saying, Brian, is that you need to reference parking allocation as shown in the drawings. The table that we're looking at now shows various scenarios of parking, but doesn't give the actual breakdown. And that's what he's saying. We just need to have, and you can reference that and maybe double check it to finalize this thing after the fact. Cause I think we're getting close enough now to the point where I'd like to respect everybody's time and see if we can wrap together a final motion and take a vote. So I think what I'm going to do, since I dragged you all through this, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. We need to go back. I think that I got to get back to, we have to go through CEQA first. Is that right? What's your
That's right. That's right.
So we're to take a separate vote, I assume, of a draft resolution for an EIR addendum. And that one is a standalone resolution, and that has no modifications to it. So I'm going to motion that we approve the resolution for the EIR addendum. I don't have it actually in front of me at this moment, but that's the document as provided.
I'll second that motion.
That's attachment number 3.
Yes, attachment number 3 to the staff, to the package. Commission Secretary, we'll go ahead and take a vote. And you're on mute.
Sorry, apologies. So we had a motion and a second. Chair Lezak,
Yes.
Commissioner Strongman,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson. If you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down since we're having audio difficulties. Thumbs up, that's an aye.
And he just hung up. You just hung up on us, Commissioner Anderson.
Commissioner Pickett,
It's okay. We'll let you go up and down.
apologies.
No.
Commissioner Pickett, no.
No.
Apologies. Commissioner Reiser
Yes.
and Commissioner Vice Chair Kerselik.
Yes.
The ayes have.
If possible, Ethan, if we could get Commissioner Anderson, even though the audio may be rough, to give a verbal aye, I think it would be helpful.
So Commissioner Anderson, can you get back to the, on your computer? Can you turn your sound back on? He can't hear us.
I did get a visual.
He's dialing in, it appears. So we'll, for the sake of correctness, we'll hang on just a second here.
Commissioner Anderson, can you hear us, or can you unmute your computer perhaps and just see if we can hear you via your computer, even if a bit broken?
He's calling in, Ethan. You might want to see if you can get him in. There you go. All right, now can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Am I back?
You're back, and now you need to make a verbal vote on the first resolution.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so having completed that vote, and the commission secretary has tallied our votes.
Yes, the final vote is 6-1. The ayes have it. The EIR addendum is adopted as presented in the resolution.
Okay, so then I'll make the next motion. And just to double check, can I motion both resolution CUP, MUP, and tentative map, or do I need to do these separately?
I would propose we do 2 separate motions. The CUP and MUP are presented in one resolution, and then the tentative map in a second. And then, 3.
Okay, so we'll move back to the attachment number 1 for the CUP and MUP. And I motion to approve the draft resolution for the CUP and MUP as modified with the updated condition of approval with the valet parking as shown in the current package online, as well as with the 2 additional conditions as described tonight by the city attorney and the commission secretary, the condition relative to the public use of the open space on the rooftop deck, and of the shared use of the cooperation for easement for the parking garage and applicable reallocation of parking spaces in exchange for that shared use.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Chair Lezak,
Yes.
Commissioner Reiser,
Yes.
Commissioner Strongman,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Pickett,
No.
and Vice Chair Kursulik.
Yes.
The ayes have it 6-1.
Before we move on, can I just confirm that that condition was amended to say so long as parking is in accordance with the parking allocations? And I guess what I never got was what's the reference document we're referring to? I want that motion to refer to the specific document. I don't know if it's one of the attachments tonight or
it's in the project plans. There is a table in the project plans, and I don't have them handy.
Could you just
Right.
reference Exhibit A, or is that too broad?
I'm comfortable with that, but I don't know if
It was attachment 7.
It's attachment 7, but it's in the project plans. It's a specific table in there. I need to go look through it to tell you which page.
It appears to be page 13 of the project plans.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
So long as parking is in accordance with the parking allocation set forth on page 13 of the project plans. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
As long as the applicant is giving his thumbs up, and I saw Alan give one, so.
You want to say the project plans dated February 6, 2020?
I do. Thank you, Commissioner Ward.
Yeah.
And then I would ask to go ahead and roll call that again with that amendment, just so the record's clear that that's part of the condition. And I also, for the record, I think I did see, but I'd ask Alan or Mr. Balducci to verbally say they're okay with that as well.
We're okay with that.
Thank you.
I'll take again the roll call as presented, motion by Chair Lezak, seconded by Commissioner Reiser, and as further clarified by the Assistant City Attorney. Chair Lezak,
Yes.
Commissioner Reiser,
Yes.
Commissioner Strongman,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Pickett,
No.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Kursulik.
Yes.
The ayes have it again, 6-1.
Okay, so moving right along, we'll now move to the draft resolution for the tentative map, attachment number 2. Motion to approve as resolution appears in the application package.
Second.
Roll call, Chair Lezak,
Yes.
Commissioner Reiser,
Yes.
Commissioner Strongman,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Pickett,
No.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Kursulik.
Yes.
The ayes have it, 6-1.
Okay, well, with that, we'll congratulate, I guess, the applicant for at least hanging in there with us. And thank you all. So we'll close the public hearings. We'll move on to our agenda to the commission considerations. Commission Secretary, are there any commission considerations this evening?
There are none.
Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the commission member and staff reports or announcements section. Are there any commission member and staff reports or announcements? Anyone from the commission secretary or any of the commissioners have anything to add?
Nothing from staff, thank you.
Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 10:29 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.